Chapter 26, Common Misery. As if completely forgot about the unpleasantness of the banquet yesterday, Lucius happily stood up and greeted Artorius with his knights as he entered his tent. "Lord Artorius, there's no need to be so formal." He appeared joyful and, after exchanging greetings with Artorius, started discussing the arrangements for Artorius and his Briton knights. "We didn't have much fun yesterday, did we? That kid can't understand the pleasures of adults, goo-ha-ha-ha." It seemed that he had learned about the relationship between Artorius and Mordred from somewhere. "But it doesn't matter. Once we reach Rome, I assure you, you'll have plenty of opportunities to enjoy the luxuries of Rome." His eyes gleamed with unmasked greed. It was a desire for Artorius and his Briton knights under his command. Lucius wanted to seize this powerful armed force. Therefore, his decision was to bring Artorius to Rome. The great, glorious eternal city still stood on the Italian peninsula. Although in certain timelines, the Western Roman Empire had relocated to Ravenna after a series of chaos and turmoil, in the timeline where Artorius existed, despite facing two invasions by the Huns and the Goths, Lucius had tenaciously rebuilt the city. He had brought all kinds of worldly extravagance and luxury into the city. Artorius and his knights were the emperor's precious assets in Rome. According to his plan, Artorius and his knights would become a part of this eternal city. Just like the Roman nobles, they would quickly immerse themselves in the prosperity and decadence of Rome. They would serve him and no longer pose a threat to the empire. Unfortunately, Artorius decisively rejected him. His reason was, "My men and I don't want to stray too far from our homeland. Please allow us to operate in the northern continent." "What do you mean?" The emperor's gaze gradually became dangerous. And he secretly decided that if Artorius, like those barbarian allies, demanded a piece of Gaul land, he would categorize Artorius as one of the most dangerous enemies. After occupying Gaul for several centuries, it had become the empire's most important and prosperous territory. None could rival it. Unlike the mountainous regions of Spain and Italy or the cold lands of Germania, Gaul was flat, warm, surrounded by three seas, and easy to defend. In the age of agriculture, it was the best land blessed by God, the optimal foundation for ruling Europe. For the Western Roman Empire, losing Spain, North Africa, Britain, or Germania posed no problem. Gaul, however, was different. It was the second most important territory after Italy. Within this crucial territory, there should not be too many strong barbarians. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Artorius's proposal surprised Lucius for quite some time before he regained his composure. What Artorius desired was not to occupy a place in the vast and prosperous Gaul. He wanted to acquire the lands of Upper Germania. Those lands were colder and faced the front line of the Germanic barbarians. They were regions where Rome exiled criminals and those who had failed in political struggles. More importantly, those lands, just like the neighboring provinces of Lower Germania, Rhaetia, and Belgica, had already fallen under harsh weather and the invasion of mad barbarians. In other words, if Artorius wanted that land, he would have to seize it himself. "Are you sure about this, Lord Artorius?" Lucius looked at Artorius with surprise. "That's not a good place, you know." "Yes, as a knight, it is my fate to be on the battlefield. Rather than spending the rest of my life in the splendor of Rome, I'd prefer to enjoy war in the northern icy lands." "Very well." Lucius pondered for a few seconds and then made a decision. "Then I entrust you with this task. I will appoint you as the governor of Upper Germania and provide partial military funding and provisions. Continue to serve Rome faithfully in the future." At this point, Lucius had made up his mind. Since Artorius had chosen this path, he would treat Artorius as Rome's watchdog. He would let him and his followers, together with the barbarians of those frigid lands, perish. However, Artorius's next words completely changed Lucius's resolution. "Of course, Your Majesty," Artorius said earnestly, "after all, Romans and Celts share a common misery." "What did you say?" After a few seconds of astonishment, Lucius interrogated, "How dare you? I am the mighty Rome. An era, a fate, the mystery is fading." Artorius's three words choked the emperor's words. As the Roman emperor, Lucius Tiberius, who carried the role of a savior similar to his mother, as King Arthur, with the mission to save Rome, couldn't possibly be unaware of the fading of the Age of Gods and the dominance of the counter-force. The inhabitants of the Age of Gods that the counter-force aimed to exterminate were not limited to the Celts alone. From the perspectives of the Age of Gods and its association with mystery, the arrogance of Romans surpassed that of the Celts by far. Even though they had abandoned the traditional ancient beliefs of chosen gods, the connection between Rome and the mystery had not been entirely eradicated. The savior of Rome before their eyes was proof of that. Lucius Tiberius was clearly a human, but his combat prowess was not inferior to that of the son of dragon Artorius. Blessings from gods, a magic sword, the strength of a giant, and the power from the Roman god Romulus, all of it allowed this emperor to possess strength comparable to that of gods. Rome boasted tens of thousands of mages, possessed the strongest magecraft in all of Europe, and even tamed powerful phantasmal species like giants. In this waning age of gods, in an age where the true ether was continuously dissipating, leaving only remnants, this was truly a great miracle. Unlike their Eastern relatives, who chose to completely abandon mystery, beliefs, and way of life, Western Rome was the sole remaining shell of the age of gods. The emperor of the Western Roman Empire still held the final stronghold. From the perspective of national strategy, Britain and the Western Roman Empire were enemies. However, from the perspective of the remnants of the age of gods, who were fighting against the counter-force, they were undeniably allies. It seems that I can trust you a little more, Lord Artorius. The Roman emperor deeply looked at Artorius and said, "Go, my governor. For me, and for yourself, go and confront this age, confront this world, confront everything that seeks to destroy us. I will provide all the support you desire in Rome. Your will is my duty, your majesty." Artorius bowed to him, and during the process of bowing, he lowered his head deeply to prevent the other party from noticing the desires and ambitions in his eyes. Chapter 27, The Legend of Artorius. The invasion of the barbarians on Britain has temporarily ceased. Similarly, the invasion of Rome by the barbarians has also come to a halt. On the continent of Europe, an astonishing scene unfolded. Peace had unexpectedly descended upon this war-torn land. People left their houses in astonishment, opened the gates, and looked around. They found themselves strangely safe. After the initial surprise came overwhelming joy. The people of the Western Roman Empire were caught up in an ecstatic frenzy. It was the last pleasure before impending doom, a chaotic revelry of debauchery and indulgence. During this brief period of safety, the Romans chose to drown themselves in alcohol. And the Roman Emperor, Lucius Tiberius, chose to conquer and make himself even greater. There is only one Rome in the world, and it belongs to this emperor. With such a declaration, Lucius launched an attack on the Eastern Roman Empire: either surrender and acknowledge him as the sole Roman emperor, or face death. Thus began a meaningless war, aimed solely at satisfying the emperor's vanity. Meanwhile, in Britain, Artoria was desperately searching for the Holy Grail and dispatching her Knights of the Round Table to resolve conflicts, or in other words, sow the seeds of their own dominion. In the increasingly desolate land, the contradictions within Britain naturally grew sharper. Commoners and nobles, minor nobles and major nobles, kings and great nobles all vied for limited resources. The pie was only so big, and no matter how it was divided, it could never satisfy everyone. The result of the Knights of the Round Table running rampant was the accumulation of resentment, heaped upon Artoria herself. In response to this situation, Artoria's approach was to search for the Holy Grail with even greater desperation, leaving no stone unturned. As long as we obtain the Holy Grail, everything will be all right. For Artoria, this was not merely a solution but an obsession. In contrast, there was Artorius. In just 6 short months, he became the most crucial general, leader, and powerful contender for the throne of the Roman Empire. After all, in Rome, might makes right. The laws of coup d'état and the Praetorian succession law were peculiar to the Roman Empire. This was due to a combination of his policies, ambitions, abilities, and geographical location. Artorius employed advanced agricultural techniques, allowing him to cultivate and maintain a certain level of food supply even in unfavorable climates. The Western Roman Empire and Britain, as well as the Germania Black Forest, served as sources of talent and troops for him. All those who seek wealth and glory, follow me. All skilled warriors who feel unfulfilled, follow me. All those who wish to prove their worth on the battlefield, follow me. I don't care about your past, your race, age, gender, or anything else. As long as you can wield a weapon and achieve greatness on the battlefield, you can obtain everything you desire. With each legendary victory of his, Artorius's words spread far and wide. A large number of knights and soldiers, be they Germanic tribes in the Black Forest, Vikings from the northern peninsula, Romans on the continent, or the Celts on the British Isles, all gathered under his banner. Artorius became one of the most powerful leaders in Germanic regions. Artorius, that barbarian from Britain, is becoming increasingly powerful. This was not the first time Emperor Lucius Tiberius, the great ruler of Rome, had heard people speak legends of Artorius. Sirius, the governor of Gaul who was Artorius's neighbor, almost daily complained to the emperor. That barbarian is about to rebel. That barbarian intends to lead 1,000,000 Germanic barbarians across the Alps and burn Rome. That barbarian wants to become the Roman emperor. Your Majesty, you must think of a solution. Of course, Artorius sent letters to inform Lucius that Sirius was about to rebel with the same frequency. This made Lucius feel annoyed and uneasy, but he always found reasons to reassure himself. Artorius showed unparalleled loyalty to the empire. Furthermore, both sides understood the concept of the end of the age of gods. Therefore, Lucius believed that Artorius would not betray him. They stood on the same side. Moreover, victories against the Germanic peoples were the only source of solace for Lucius. Because apart from that, the empire was constantly plagued by problems. The wars with the Eastern Roman Empire never went smoothly. Even the battles against the barbarian tribes within their borders were no exception. Despite his immense power, unmatched by anyone else, he consistently failed due to inexplicable external factors. Sometimes it was storms ravaging the fleet. Other times it was outbreaks of disease among the troops. Several offensives against the Eastern Roman Empire had ended in failure, causing the decline of the Western Roman Empire. On the contrary, while Artorius continued to expand, dissatisfied individuals from the Western Roman Empire gathered around him. The people of Britain, disappointed in King Arthur, were no different. Subsequently, the largest force under Artorius consisted of the Germanic tribes. Since his arrival at the border of the Black Forest, the tribes emerging from within became Artorius's prey. Those tribes were crushed, annihilated, and devoured by him and his Germanic army. Strong individuals joined his army to fight for him in all directions, while the weak became his slaves, clearing forests, filling marshes, and cultivating the land for him. A correct yet cruel political, economic, and military system created this monster known as the Empire's Germanic army, a highly efficient and fanatical war machine that was entirely different from the decaying and decadent Western Roman government. More importantly, Artorius, or rather the Germanic peoples, possessed a fate. The hunting grounds they roamed yielded more prey than the Romans and Celts. The land they cultivated produced more crops than the Romans and Celts. Each Germanic peoples was more ambitious than the Romans, despite being considered foolish compared to the Celts and Romans. In terms of civilization, technology, and even individual combat prowess, they were inferior to the Celts and Romans. And yet, they undeniably obtained a fate and were favored by fate. These people would uphold this fate in future timelines, where they would establish a world order in which they would dominate. It was already predetermined from the start that is their fate. Raising a tiger leads to troubles. As such, when Lucius secretly regretted in Rome, the 16-year-old Artorius firmly made up his mind. It's about time. After another intimate moment with Mordred, he reached a decision. Little Mo. Artorius spoke to his giddy brother, no, it was his sister now, who appeared blissful in his embrace. Do you miss home? Home. Upon hearing that word, Mordred, who had been enchanted by Artorius for the past 2 years and had lost track of everything, took a while to understand that home referred to Britain. Ah! Even though it had been less than 2 years since they left, it felt like a long, long time ago. That's right, home. Artorius stood up and said to Mordred, I'm going back to Britain. Will you come with me, little Mo? Upon hearing Artorius's words, Mordred instinctively felt a mix of familiarity and anxiety. But in the end, she responded to Artorius. Wherever you go, I will go, brother. Chapter 28, Return. A warship from the continent of Europe docked at the port of Londinium. Unlike before, the people disembarking from the ship were not Saxons or any other Germanic invaders, but their own people from Britain. In addition to Artorius, Mordred, and a few other relatives, including Gareth, there were knights from various parts of Britain and Saxon warriors who had already settled there. Once the ship docked, porters, merchants, and even some beggars hurriedly gathered around. Children playing with wooden swords in the streets and elderly people conversing under trees were also drawn to the commotion. This was because, over the past 2 years, the Germanic army had continuously brought resources and wealth to Britain. The knights and tribal warriors who followed Artorius would either return directly to Britain during their furloughs or entrust a powerful and reputable knight to bring back the spoils and rewards they had obtained. The wealth from the European continent filled the void in Britain's treasury, the food shortage caused by increasingly barren lands, and the empty pockets of the people due to King Arthur's constant expeditions. It's truly a sign of the times that even those bandits can brazenly appear on British soil. Although some people made such comments, when the ships from the Germanic army docked, most people looked at Artorius and his entourage with excited and envious eyes. As the banners of the Red Dragon of Britain, the Roman Eagle, and the Germanic Wolf flew high, everyone, after a moment of surprise, descended into a state of frenzied excitement. In all of Europe, and even the world, there was only one person who simultaneously used these three banners. He represented Britain's son of dragon, the Roman Empire, and the ruler and conqueror of Germanic Artorius Pendragon. It's the Prince Artorius. He's back! He's back! Almost everyone in Londinium rushed to the port as quickly as possible. They cheered loudly, welcoming their great leader back home. Artorius had gained immense prestige through his continuous victories in the European wars. When the knights who had achieved fame under Artorius returned to their hometowns, they always sparked people's longing for Artorius. Especially in the situation where King Arthur's rule was deteriorating. People seemed more inclined to follow a leader who could bring them benefits rather than a ruler like King Arthur who constantly demanded their perseverance and patience. Artorius's reputation in Britain had already caught up to or even surpassed that of King Arthur. The Battle of Camlan. Riding on a pure white warhorse, Artorius surveyed his surroundings, waving and gesturing to the people on both sides of the street who cheered for him, and he thought to himself. In the original history, the Battle of Camlan must be about to happen. Which means Britain's tolerance for my mother's rule is nearing its limit. Now, Britain's situation was completely different from the original timeline. Due to Artorius's efforts on the European continent, Britain's situation was more stable than before. The nobles, lords, and kings all tried to please him. They often sent letters or dispatched envoys, and their words, whether explicit or implied, were all about their hopes that Artorius would bring them wealth in Europe. If one were to consider it from the perspective of King Arthur's rebellion, Artorius had done much better than Mordred in the original history. The reason he could unite the lords and nobles of Britain, aside from their disgust and fear towards King Arthur, was that he could bring them tangible benefits and promises. This was something Mordred in original history couldn't achieve. Of course, Artorius never thought of betraying his own mother. But if fate demands my mother's downfall, then Artorius felt a bit conflicted. So far, everything he had done had indirectly fulfilled the demands of fate. That is the rise of the Germanic and the challenge to Rome. But what if fate demanded that he must betray King Arthur Artoria, and deal a fatal blow to his most beloved mother? What would he do then? Humph! I dare you! Thinking this, Artorius sneered disdainfully. Then he continued to wave and gesture to the welcoming crowds around him. This was something that Artoria would never do. That upright and honest king would never resort to such tricks, speeches, or a populist attitude to show everyone I love you. Artoria always relied on concrete actions. Unfortunately, in terms of effectiveness, Artoria's concrete actions paled in comparison to Artorius's showmanship. Many times, what people need is this kind of attitude and feeling. They need to have the illusion of being noticed and cared for. While Artoria is aloof and upright or noble and just, the ultimate outcome is simply growing distant from people. In contrast, Artorius, who evokes cheers and emotions from people, is the one who truly fulfills their expectations of a king. Humans are truly interesting creatures. Brother, what are you talking about? Mordred, curious yet somewhat puzzled, asked Artorius as he made such a sighing remark. Ah, nothing. It's just that. Artorius gazed at Mordred. I can't help but feel that humans are truly fickle creatures. Because, several years ago, when Artoria, leading the Knights of the Round Table, attacked, expelled, and defeated the Saxons, everyone in Britain welcomed them with open arms, just like they do now to him. But, now was a different story. Mordred still didn't understand her brother's words, but this time, she chose not to inquire further. Instead, she showed a lovely smile and let it go. Happy girls don't bother themselves with such things. All she had to do was obey and follow Artorius's commands and bask in her brother's affection. She didn't need to concern herself with anything else. Clinging to her purpose, Mordred became Artorius's most sharp-witted shield and sword over the course of these 2 years. Suppressing rebellions, dealing with enemy forces, and commanding battles under Artorius's guidance, Mordred's talents were fully brought to light. Just as Artorius hoped, Mordred showcased her full potential and proved to be a genius, almost on par with Artoria herself. Mordred aptly assumed the role of a prominent military general, standing on her own, and showing absolute loyalty to Artorius. She was his best companion and partner. She readily undertook many tasks that other knights of the Round Table found inconvenient, ensuring they were handled efficiently. Moreover, aside from the battlefield, in Artorius's daily life, Mordred obeyed his every word, leaving nothing unsaid. She also took care of his daily needs and provided solace for his weary body and soul. Chapter 29, My Aunt, Morgan. Are we going home? On their way, Mordred asked Artorius. Are we going back to Camelot? Not exactly. Artorius replied with a smile. Since they were in a crowded street, he couldn't hold his dear sister in his arms and gave her head pat while speaking, as he would during their private moments. It's your home, little Mo. Artorius said tenderly. Mine. Mordred's expression changed. She understood the meaning behind his words of your home. It referred to her mother, Morgan Le Fay's residence. Artorius going to see mother meant there was something important happening. Now, where did Morgan live? Morgan, as Princess of Britain, held a high position and possessed exceptional abilities. She had numerous lovers and husbands, all for the sake of power and mutual gain. She could skillfully utilize the castles owned by those individuals. Mordred suspected that beneath those castles lay workshops where Morgan practiced her mage craft. Furthermore, Morgan Le Fay represented the dark aspect or the evil polar opposite of the Lady of the Lake Vivian. She also possessed the ability and qualifications to access Avalon. So. No, you've got it wrong, little Mo. After the welcoming banquet, Artorius politely declined the invitation from the Lord of the city of Londinium. Instead, he chose to settle in his own estate outside the city. As the most powerful and possibly the wealthiest person in all of Britain, Artorius had established bases in significant regions of Britain. Londinium, as one of Britain's future important cities, was no exception. Upon entering the city, Artorius's loyal knights of the Round Table immediately secured the estate. Mages raised barriers, and released hounds and familiars, transforming the estate into a fortress within the shortest possible time. Mordred, now wearing casual attire within this estate that solely belonged to Artorius, relaxed. It was only then that he answered her previous question. We're not going to find my aunt, but rather, we'll have her come find us. Have her, come find us. Mordred stood by Artorius, like the most loyal of guards. It wasn't until he held her hand and pulled her towards him that she gracefully fell into her big brother's embrace. Mordred, now clad in lightweight attire within the estate, leaned comfortably against Artorius's arm, extended her hand, and wrapped it around his waist. She felt warmth and reassurance from this gesture as she continued her questioning. But why? Because of desire. Artorius joyfully stated. My dear aunt, also your mother, desires this country, desires Britain to be hers. That's why. As usual, Mordred's plump cheek buttocks pressed against Artorius's thigh, which always brought him a brighter smile than usual. And as always, he enjoyed using an inductive approach in his conversations with her, training her adorable sister's logical thinking skills. So. Unlike Artorius's radiant smile, Mordred's expression became solemn and distressed. Like her siblings, she was dispatched to the Knights of the Round Table by Morgan, naturally with intentions against King Arthur. An assassin, that was. However, just like her brothers and sisters, she eventually betrayed Morgan as well. From this, one could deduce how much of a failure Britain's witch was as a mother. Her children had all turned against her. She will come to brother, intending to harm. Yes. Artorius interrupted her and nodded with a smile. Because you see, I pose a greater threat to her rule over Britain than our dear father, haha. Mordred. Little Mo, are you worried about me? Artorius asked, observing his sister's somewhat gloomy expression. Don't worry, I still have a few tricks up my sleeve when it comes to dealing with that woman. But. Or, are you worried for your mother? Artorius inquired, continuing to reassure her. Rest assured, I won't really do anything to her. After all, she's still my aunt. Artorius's assurance alleviated most of Mordred's worries. The remaining small fraction dissipated completely in his sweet kiss. As Artorius gazed at her with gentle eyes, the conditioned reflex caused by the Pavlovian effect swiftly plunged Mordred into a state of readiness for battle. Artorius, with his hands, felt the warmth of his adorable sister in his embrace and then lowered his head. MMMHH. Even though they had experienced it many times before, this encounter still excited Mordred. Brother, she murmured in a daze while wrapping her arms around Artorius's neck. Externally, she always appeared dominant and rebellious, but in front of Artorius, she was as weak as a lamb. Both her body and mind were completely captivated by him, under his absolute control. After Artorius landed in Britain, he didn't immediately head north to Camelot as some might have expected. Instead, he stayed in a mansion near Londinium, leading a blissful life together with Mordred. They would train and spar with each other during the day and continue their training at night. Life was full of joy, and Mordred knew nothing else. What is Britain? Who are mother and father? Morgan Le Fay, who is that? This delightful life continued for 4.5 days. As Artorius anticipated, something unexpected happened. On that evening, while Artorius and Mordred were enjoying a candlelit dinner, just before he was about to tell his sister a modified fairy tale, he sensed a disturbance in the force, or rather in the true ether. Clearly, Mordred, who sat across from him, had not noticed it. Either she wasn't sensitive enough or her attention was too focused on Artorius. So, it wasn't until Artorius snapped his fingers and added an extra set of cutlery to the table that she finally realized her mother, Morgan Le Fay, had suddenly appeared. Chapter 30, Britain, do you want it? There stood a beautiful woman dressed in a long black dress, wearing a black veil. Through the translucent veil, one could catch a glimpse of a face that bore a striking resemblance to Mordred's. If young Mordred were to grow into a mature woman, she would probably look something like this. No, that won't do. It's hard to imagine Mordred in the body of a mature woman of that age. Artorius lacked a bit of imagination in this regard, indicating that he was still a good-natured boy. His aunt's appearance was even more alluring than Mordred's, and her figure was even more enchanting. Her curves were pronounced, far superior to the adolescent Mordred's. Artorius silently gave his approval. Morgan Le Fay. Artorius Pendragon. Speaking of which, this was Artorius's first meeting with his aunt. They raised their glasses in a toast to each other. Their smiles seemed genuine, lacking any hostility, which relieved Mordred. Just a moment ago, upon sensing the arrival of her mother, she almost drew her sword and attacked. Of course, it would be at her mother. Who else? However, after the gesture of raising their glasses, Artorius simply placed his glass back in its original position. Did you put something in the drink? Morgan's voice matched her figure and good looks. It had a seductive, slightly husky quality. It easily evoked thoughts of what kind of songs she would sing if she were thrown onto a bed and various other activities took place. Of course not. Artorius nearly burst into laughter at the other's deflective behavior. He leaned forward slightly and continued, "My dear aunt, it seems that it was you who slipped some aphrodisiac in there by yourself." The two silently locked eyes and continued to do so for a while before they burst into simultaneous laughter. Their laughter held genuine delight rather than a forced or insincere smile. This only puzzled Mordred further. Her wariness didn't diminish, instead, it grew stronger. "So, you're here just to wait for me?" Morgan asked Artorius. After receiving a positive response, the alluring woman leaned back, accentuating the voluptuous parts of her body. She looked at him with a gaze filled with confusion and seduction. Because previously, she had detected astonishment, desire, and a conquering urge in his eyes. Just like the men she had encountered before. He desired herself. And so, she could use this man to achieve her goals. For Morgan, it was an easy matter. And if not? Maybe we should find a different place to have a proper discussion. Morgan's gaze flickered, tinged with teasing desire. Sure, no problem. Brother. Upon hearing Artorius's response, Mordred grew anxious. In her heart, her mother was a fearsome existence. The thought of leaving Artorius alone to face Morgan terrified her. Don't worry, I will be fine, Artorius reassured her, holding Mordred's hand. But... really, don't worry. With Artorius's reassurance, Mordred regained her composure. Your brother isn't as helpless as you think. Relax, okay. Okay. Morgan watched coldly from the side, while her feeling of resentment continued to grow. Although she hadn't invested much maternal love in Mordred, there were times when she would become excited and even filled with murderous intent as she looked at Mordred's reflection that resembled her sister. But now, Seeing Mordred receive Artorius's favor and witnessing the interaction between the siblings, she couldn't help but feel anger and dissatisfaction. Mordred was her daughter, her possession. Yet she had been taken away. Damn it, all those Pendragon bastards are damn traitors. Whether this one or that one, they're all damn bastards. Unconsciously, she cursed herself as well. The witch gritted her teeth tightly until Artorius calmed Mordred and looked her way. Then she revealed a seductive smile as enticing as poppies. In the next moment, Artorius and Morgan vanished, leaving only Mordred behind. The girl who deeply loved her big brother felt a heavy sense of unease. Even though Artorius had assured her, the true state of affairs remained unknown. Before her brother's return, Mordred had to prepare for the worst. "Please be safe and sound, my dear brother." She silently prayed like this. Meanwhile, while Mordred silently prayed for Artorius, in a castle hundreds of kilometers away, belonging to Morgan Le Fay, this heavily fortified magecraft fortress easily opened its doors to Artorius. The situation was completely different from what Mordred had imagined, even the opposite. Artorius and Morgan were engaged in a delightful conversation. The air was filled with the scent of exotic incense. Magical puppets acted as musicians, playing smooth and elegant melodies. Moonlight and starlight, enhanced by the effects of magecraft, illuminated the castle hall, making it incredibly splendid. In this dreamlike ballroom, Artorius gracefully held Morgan's waist as they danced. They gazed into each other's eyes, witnessing the desire gradually intensify and become passionate. Morgan confirmed that this handsome boy was different from his mother. He lacked any sense of righteousness and integrity, instead exuding a strong desire for material things. For Artoria, as long as there was clean water and sufficient black bread to sustain her energy for battle, she was content. She could sleep in a stable, even while wearing armor. But for Artorius, he indulged in fine wine, exquisite food, and beautiful women. He loved palaces and luxuries. "You're quite skilled at dancing. The same goes for you." The ambiguous atmosphere gradually heated up. Although they were meeting for the first time, it felt like they had longed to meet each other. Well, if one talks about being relatives, Morgan was the sister of the king, so she was Artorius's aunt. They were close kin, so having certain similarities in character was acceptable. It was a normal thing, right? "So, what is your purpose?" Morgan asked with a tempting voice, adopting a gentle yet seductive tone. However, this feigned gentleness disappeared after Artorius spoke the next sentence, replaced by deep resentment and hatred. "Britain, do you want it?" Facing Morgan Le Fay, Artorius Pendragon, the crown prince and the leader of the Germanic army, asked casually. It was as if he was asking Morgan if she wanted a bone-in ribeye steak. "If you cooperate with me, I will consider giving Britain to you," Artorius said to her in a joking manner. Chapter 31, Dragon Prince and Witch of Vengeance. "Are you playing with me, King Arthur's son?" The dance continued, and Artorius still held Morgan's waist, keeping a firm but gentle grip. However, there was a change in her gaze, adding a dangerous allure. It was as if, at the slightest provocation, she would go all out, using her black magic, her treasures, her body, her nails, her teeth, everything at her disposal to kill the man before her. Artorius began to understand why other knights of the Round Table had complicated feelings when it came to Morgan Le Fay. This madness and hatred sent chills down one's spine from the depths of her being. Not at all. Nevertheless, Artorius disregarded Morgan's hatred and madness. He spoke to her in a gentle tone, as if he were a tender lover. "Compared to what I desire, Britain is just a meager reward that I, as prince, have earned." "Oh? Is that so?" As if it were an illusion, the hatred and madness from before vanished entirely. Morgan returned to being the enchanting witch she was. "Your father, the king, probably wouldn't approve of your actions. Trust me, I have the ability to persuade her. In English, there is a distinction between feminine and masculine third-person pronouns. When Artorius referred to his father as her, Morgan confirmed that this prince knew the secret of her sister's identity. Phew, isn't this betrayal? Is it really okay for someone like me to conspire with you, my dear nephew? The burden on my father is too heavy, isn't it? As his son, it is only natural for me to share the responsibilities and fulfill my filial duty." Ha, he, ha ha ha, I've never met someone who could make treason sound so unique before. Artorius's words amused Morgan. "But it doesn't matter. In the end, it will be my foolish sister, who will regret it and shed tears." So, tell me, young prince, what benefits do you seek from me? She whispered in Artorius's ear, her voice carrying temptation, and it sparked numerous intriguing and wild thoughts in his mind. While Artorius tried to suppress his spear from standing, he also countered by lowering his voice, brushing against her ear, and conveying his intentions. Cooperate with me. No, wait a moment. This feeling, this sensation. Just as Artorius suppressed his spear, Morgan also tried to suppress her wet cave by clamping her legs. That sister of hers, whom she both loved and hated, bore about 70 to 80% resemblance to this extraordinarily handsome and attractive youth, possessing a heart of schemer like herself. Everything, be it his status, appearance, abilities, or temperament, matched her interests. Artorius was a mighty attacker against every woman with saber's faces, a specialist in attacking the heart of women with twisted desires and thirst for love, and a deadly attacker against any mature beauties, a triple threat that was unrivaled in the world. Artorius, the White Dragon Prince. In typical fairy tales, usually, a dragon and a prince would be in a hostile relationship. The dragon devours the prince, and the prince seeks to slay the dragon. But in this exceptionally peculiar circumstance, where the dragon became the prince, when sharp fangs and immense terror merged with tenderness, redemption, and sunlight, everything associated with a prince, the world witnessed the one and only dragon Prince Artorius Pendragon. Simultaneously possessing the plundering and possessive nature of a dragon and the gentleness and passion of a prince, the fusion of the two became a deadly poison to women. It surpassed the so-called elixir of love, remaining more profound, covert, and lethal. And, of course, it was more genuine. In this game of love and mutual testing, Morgan was at a disadvantage from the very beginning. Although her stunning beauty and demeanor captivated Artorius, it ultimately stemmed from his lust. If it were a voluptuous and seductive big sister, like a certain purple lady, he would have fallen just as easily. In other words, Morgan had already lost from the beginning. Yes, she had indeed lost without a doubt. Morgan, this sensation. Artorius, cooperate with me, help me achieve my goal, and I will give you Britain. Morgan, this feeling. Artorius, as for something more specific, do you know how to usurp fate, that kind of magecraft? Morgan, NGHHH. Artorius. He ceased his conversation with Morgan and even prepared to halt his steps because he sensed that something was off with Morgan's state. Usurping fate. Of course, in the next second, Morgan had already snapped out of that intoxicated state, returning to normal. She was not a gentlewoman longing for love, nor a valiant warrior. Instead, she was most commonly known as a malicious and vengeful woman. Yes. Artorius said while gazing at her weirdly. You should know about my plans and my grand ambition, right? Rome. Morgan focused her gaze on Artorius. Everyone says that one day you will start a war and destroy Rome, replacing it. That's right. Artorius replied without hesitation. In the lands of Britain, far from Rome's control, he no longer needed to conceal his ambitions. So, I need your help. Despite not having an advantage in terms of age or physique, the attractive youth unabashedly extended his hand in an assertive manner, lifting Morgan's chin. I need you, Morgan Le Fay, to join me. Help me fulfill my desires, and I will pass on to you the concept of king of the island that I inherited from King Vortigern. May you become the Queen of Britain. In an instant, Morgan's heart skipped a beat. In that case, what can I do for you? She asked. When you speak of usurping fate, what specifically does it entail? Like what you heard. Artorius released his grip. The dance continued as he let go of Morgan's waist, allowing her to complete a turn before pulling her back into his embrace. Before attacking Rome, first, I must obtain and usurp fate. The fate of Rome? You aim to usurp Rome's fate? Not exactly. Artorius continued, surprising Morgan with his words. What I seek to usurp is the fate belonging to the Franks. They are fated to replace Rome and become the representative of the Germanic peoples, the ruler of Europe. I want their fate. Can you do it, Morgan? If possible, Morgan really wanted to say to Artorius, yes, I can do it, and then throw herself into his embrace without hesitation. But she couldn't. It wasn't just about losing face. Well, in reality, losing face was indeed her concern. However, the bigger reason was that Morgan couldn't fulfill what Artorius had said. I can't do it, that goes beyond the boundaries of magecraft, almost akin to a miracle. Even the gods cannot freely shift the fate of an individual, tribe, or nation? You mentioned freely. Artorius seized on the keyword in Morgan's statement. Can I understand it as you being able to do this under certain conditions? Chapter 32, Resentment. Under Artorius's gaze, shimmering with a flame of desire, Morgan swallowed nervously. Reluctantly, but facing the undeniable truth, she found herself at a disadvantage when confronted with this prince. Despite her reluctance, she mustered the courage to express Artorius's desires. I can conduct research, but it would be best to find mages who have a deeper understanding of fate. The more top-tier mages we can gather, the better, she said to Artorius. In addition, immense magical energy is required. And you must have complete control over the target you wish to transfer fate to. Immense magical energy is not a problem, Artorius replied, his gaze flickering. Complete control, that is also not a problem. As for mages with the deepest understanding of fate, do you have any candidates in mind? Well, Morgan began pondering. You do, don't you? Artorius interrupted. The distance between Artorius and Morgan grew closer as if a slight movement forward would allow their lips to meet. It was as though with a bit more assertiveness, he could press the seductive and alluring Morgan against the wall, and ravish her body. Yes, I do, Morgan admitted. Under such pressure, Morgan compromised once again and revealed what she knew the most familiar individuals when it came to fate. They were characters who appeared in both Celtic and Norse mythologies. At the fading of the Age of Gods, as many gods fell and the survivors retreated into the reverse side of the world, unable to return, it was the perfect timing for Artorius to find the best candidate. A top-tier mage well versed in rune, especially primordial rune, Morgan said the name. Scathatch. Artorius seemed to be not surprised, he stared at Morgan with an expression that said, "Ah, hearing that name doesn't surprise me at all." Meanwhile, Morgan, even though the flicker of desire in Artorius's eyes was brief, couldn't help but feel a tinge of jealousy. This rascal, even though he's holding me and dancing with me, is thinking about another woman. This jealous emotion, which was unimaginable when they first met, gnawed at Morgan's heart. Very well, with her, we have two candidates, Artorius said, seemingly unaware of Morgan's emotional turmoil. He wore a joyful smile and began considering other candidates. The more exceptional mages, the better. Under the current circumstances, they would need at least 3 candidates. As for those average mages, given the power and reputation of Artorius right now, he could acquire as many as he needed. As the final brilliance of the Age of Gods, the territory of Rome was home to countless mages. Artorius would have no shortage of mages willing to be recruited. But when it came to truly top-tier ones, Merlin, perhaps. That frivolous man was the first to come to Artorius's mind, and then he contemplated. That pleasure-seeker, I wonder if he'll lend a hand. 50-50. If Merlin were to respond as the court mage of Britain, he would likely decline Artorius's request for such a dangerous endeavor. However, if respond as the pleasure-seeker incubus, the mischievous mage who didn't shy away from any mischief might be more enthusiastic. After all, back then, when Artorius's grandfather, King Uther, asked for his help in creating a man-made savior, he eagerly helped. That was the kind of person he was. For now, let's consider Merlin as one option. But relying solely on Merlin might not be enough. As he pondered again, Artorius came up with another candidate. At the same time, Morgan, who had been observing him closely, immediately sensed his thoughts. Another woman came to his mind. Damn this womanizer! I'm still in front of you. Her jealousy and resentment towards Artorius intensified. With that person, we have 4. Artorius concluded simultaneously. Having completed his calculations, he shifted his attention back to the woman in front of him. Excellent. Confirming that his plan had taken another step forward, he felt satisfied. A radiant smile appeared on Artorius's face as he looked at Morgan. That's right, before that, Morgan had never received anything. Whether from her father, her sister, or any of her siblings, she had never received anything. Even though she was the eldest daughter, her father always favored her younger sister. He invested all his love in her sister and went through so much trouble to make her the ruler of Britain. She was the eldest daughter, according to inheritance rights, she should have been the first. Even according to the mystery aspect, she inherited the authority of the king of the island and was a blessed child. Her status was even higher than that of a man-made savior sister. Why did all the attention go to her sister? Why wouldn't her father even give her a little bit of love? Then, as she grew up, for a period of time, Morgan also tried to love her sister. But it didn't work. They were family, sisters. Even though they didn't live together when they were young due to family circumstances, they were still sisters. She had even helped her sister so much. But why? Why wouldn't her sister even look at her properly? Her sister didn't want to be with her, didn't want to accept her feelings, and didn't like her. If that was the case, then she didn't want a sister like that either. And those children as children, shouldn't they unconditionally obey their own mother's commands? They should unconditionally obey her, love, and respect her. But why? Why did all of her children gather around her sister instead? Just thinking about it ignites hatred and resentment, surging incessantly. Then emotions spiral out of control, anger builds up, wanting to destroy everything cherished by that foolish sister. Ah, no, it's not about destruction, but about taking away. No, actually, all of those things belong to her in the first place, so it's just reclaiming what is rightfully hers. This Britain, this throne, whether it's familial love, friendship, or romantic love, everything must be taken back from Artoria's hands. Of course, besides that, there's also someone that belonged to her sister, and that someone was now softly spoken in her ear. You did well, Morgan Le Fay. Someone named Artorius Pendragon, the son of her sister, Artoria King Arthur. As our first collaboration, I feel quite satisfied. An existence perfectly aligned with Morgan's desires right now. Whether it's the desire for affection or the desire for revenge. I believe that in the future, we will. Artorius's words were forcibly cut off as a dagger was thrust into his side. Chapter 33, Reality Marble. Artorius tilted his head, gently touching the oozing wound, and looked at Morgan with a puzzled expression. I'm really sorry, Your Highness. The witch responded, wearing a pleased smile. Compared to obeying your commands like a slave and constantly worrying about your heartless abandonment, this is much simpler. Artorius pulled out the dagger. As one of the legendary dragon species, his regenerative abilities should have healed the wound instantly. But this time, it didn't. Not only did the wound fail to heal, it even festered. Before that, Artorius was wearing beautiful noble clothes, a combination of blue and silver, reinforced with magecraft to surpass ordinary fine plate armor. Yet, it was pierced effortlessly by the opponent's dagger. The mage who crafted the clothes had boasted to Artorius, vowing its imperviousness. Was he not afraid of Artorius, so he cut corners and compromised on the clothes' quality? Or maybe he wasn't as skilled as he boasted. Perhaps neither was the true reason. The real reason was the woman in front of Artorius named Morgan Le Fay. Her strength was unreasonably powerful. Poison! Artorius said to her. Yes, that's right. Artorius felt no pain from the wound. Instead, there was a slight numbing sensation, confirming Morgan's methods. Are you trying to kill me? It wouldn't benefit you either. As if the poison had taken effect, Artorius said while covering the wound, slowly taking 2 steps back. Then he sat down on an apparitional chair. Despite his composed expression, beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and the muscles on his face twitched uncontrollably, evidence of his pain tolerance. Why the sudden change of heart? What benefit do you gain from dealing with me here? You can guess. Morgan replied, maintaining her distance from Artorius. Simultaneously, a black mist appeared around her, rapidly transforming into a fully armored battalion of knights. With the clanking of gears, even larger puppets appeared, followed by stone gargoyles and bipedal wyverns in mid-air. These creatures almost overcrowded the once empty hall. They were ferocious, malevolent, and exuded an unrestrained sense of terror. It seemed that Morgan had brought out all her resources, sparing no expense to capture Artorius. Hee hee. Artorius chuckled softly, then unsheathed his sword. Do you really think you can defeat me with these weaklings, Morgan? You won't know unless you try, right? As her words fell, the monsters, puppets, knights, gargoyles, and bipedal dragons all ferociously lunged toward Artorius, baring their fangs and claws. It was as if they wanted to tear the dragon prince apart. Of course, they wouldn't actually kill Artorius. Morgan's plan was to render Artorius defenseless in this battle, that would be enough. It was sufficient for her to execute her other plan. Though it was an impulsive and recently devised plan, in an instant, Morgan's desire reached its peak. Well, you're really cruel, Aunt. Artorius had no choice but to stand up, swinging his sword and slaying all the creatures rushing towards him. His swordsmanship was extremely refined, a fusion of martial arts and military sword techniques, forming a style unique to him. Such swordsmanship was suitable for dueling both single opponents and multiple experts, as well as sweeping through armies. The elegance of his swordplay and the ferocity he displayed in battle as a dragon stirred Morgan's heart. Yes, you're right. She responded cheerfully to Artorius, saying, after all, I am a witch, my dear nephew. While in her mind, Morgan thought repeatedly, I must have this boy. I must have this boy. Humph. A witch, hey. Artorius snorted. I'm going to take this boy home and raise him. Morgan said obsessively in her mind. In the next moment, Artorius released his grip on his wound. As he gripped his sword tightly with both hands, his magical energy surged rapidly, fueled by the dragon magic core until it reached its maximum capacity. With his rapid manipulation of magical energy, the temperature within tens of meters around him suddenly dropped, as cold as death. In an instant, all the monsters approaching Artorius were frozen, transformed into lifelike ice sculptures. Suddenly, the area around Artorius became a desolate place of pale silver and icy blue. This absolute silence, the overwhelming cold and frost, spread rapidly from him to the surroundings. Even Morgan felt a sense of dread from this terrifying reserve of magical energy. Wait, what is this? It exceeded her understanding. Even the highest-ranking dragons, the highest-ranking magical beings, including Artoria, the Red Dragon of Britain, or the White Dragon Vortigern, who bestowed Artorius with great power, did not possess such immense magical energy. Moreover, he was being affected by her poison, which she had carefully prepared, originally meant for her adorable sister. If it weren't for her adorable sister already possessing Avalon, a scabbard capable of withstanding any harm, Morgan would have already celebrated her victory by now. But you really underestimate me, Aunt. Artorius smiled, and the presence of the Dragon Prince continued to rise. In his hand, Clarent flickered with a dazzling and ominous blood-red light. Don't you ever hear an idiom of don't judge a book by its cover? As Artorius uttered those words, Morgan's castle had already transformed into a frost domain belonging to the Dragon Prince. It was the reflection of Artorius's will, his reality marble known as Frost of Deathly Silence. It was a technique obtained through relentless battles and constant victories against the mad Germanic armies, as he led his army through the icy landscapes of Europe. I have been making progress and getting stronger, you know. The frozen sculptures of the creatures shattered in an instant, turning into debris on the ground. At the same time, the warmth within Morgan's body was also taken away. My body, I can't move. Morgan wanted to scream, but found her voice had been stripped away as well. Her sense of touch, hearing, sight, in her current state, was utterly vulnerable. In a state of utter horror, Morgan, one of the most famous and powerful witches of her time, was subdued by Artorius Pendragon instantly. Chapter 34, Victory and Defeat. Artorius pressed Morgan tightly, his gleaming silver-frosted magic sword, Clarent, poised at her neck. In the blink of an eye, he could sever her fair neck, separating her beautiful head from her body. Artorius's reality marble had vanished without a trace. The castle had returned to its normal state, with all of Morgan's deployed creatures crushed. In contrast, the non-combatant and weaker creatures had been spared. For example, the musician puppets continued their performance. However, due to internal magecraft malfunctions, the melodies they played were discordant, akin to a broken tune. Well, I must say, Morgan, you really made this prince break a sweat. Morgan's poison had indeed posed a significant challenge for Artorius. Despite the tremendous transformation in Artorius's foundation or concept, from Dragon of Britain to Dragon of the Emperor and Dragon of Europe, while White Dragon refined through the baptism of the Teutoburg forest, ascending as Frost Dragon. His power had also greatly increased after devouring numerous Germanic tribes and embodying the concept of a Germanic ruler. But the pain still persisted. Targeted poisons were still targeted poisons after all. Although their effectiveness had diminished, it was akin to reducing a potentially lethal pneumonia to a severe cold. It was still uncomfortable, still painful. Of course, he had long grown accustomed to pain. His body, honed beneath his elegant attire, bore scars crisscrossing it. Aside from the scars on his face that needed to be eliminated, Artorius retained all of those as his medals. While Artorius was happy as he gained victory, Morgan on the other hand, even in defeat, also felt happy. Ha ha ha. As Artorius laughed merrily, Morgan found herself thinking, it wouldn't be so bad to be killed by him like this. After all, her life had always been chaotic. A chaotic life, coupled with an ironically fitting death for a witch, seemed quite appropriate. However, that was not the case. To Morgan's astonishment, Artorius's blade passed beside her neck, and then, with an air of superiority, he kissed her passionately. Morgan resisted only slightly as her frozen body, encased in the icy stillness, melted under the warmth of the moment. She grabbed hold of Artorius's back, viciously digging her 10 nails into him. "Don't misunderstand," Artorius said, his gaze flickering. He continued speaking in a pleasurable yet condescending tone, "This prince isn't interested in an old hag like you. It was merely a contingency measure to ensure your limbs wouldn't freeze. After all, I still need you for my plan." Morgan's response to Artorius came in the form of a slap across his face. Of course, before it could hit its target, Artorius grabbed her wrist. Morgan glared at the arrogant guy who had pinned her down and spoke shamelessly. He seduced her to such an extent but refused to take any responsibility. This guy was a bastard. With that thought, Morgan's other hand swung toward Artorius's face once more. Naturally, it was caught again. Her attempt to kick his knee was also suppressed, and in close quarters combat, he had the upper hand. "Don't go too far, old hag," Artorius said to her. In the next moment, the dagger that had previously pierced Artorius's abdomen was transferred to his hand, and without hesitation, he used it to stab Morgan's body, exactly where he had been wounded before. Intense pain caused Morgan's body to convulse. Her eyes widened, and tears uncontrollably streamed down her face. Before she could scream in agony, Artorius covered her mouth with his hand. "Rejoice and consider yourself fortunate that you are still alive because you are still useful to this prince. Otherwise, the punishment for raising a hand against this prince would be much worse than this." Artorius spoke to her in such a manner. Only then did he release his grip on her mouth and rise from her body. "Ugh, you bastard! I've never seen such a despicable bastard like you." Morgan, who struggled to get up, rebuked the scum of the night world with trembling words, You. And then her words stopped there. Confronted by Artorius's aggressively piercing eyes, feminine vulnerability and fear engulfed Morgan's heart, leaving her trembling and almost powerless to resist. Observing the pitiful state of this woman, clearly already in a disadvantageous position, unable even to muster a bold retort, Artorius revealed a delighted smile. He approached once again, enveloping her in his embrace. The effects of fear, along with her inexplicable state of mind, allowed Artorius to control Morgan as he pleased. "So, it's settled." Artorius spoke to her with a teasing tone. "For a first encounter, I'm quite satisfied with your abilities. So, let's meet often in the future, Aunt Morgan." "Arg." With that, Artorius withdrew the dagger from Morgan's body. The excruciating pain caused her to spasm. "I'm going back to accompany little Mo. I will take this as a token of our meeting." Artorius stowed away the dagger and, with a magnetic tone, whispered in her ear. "Continue to assist me. If you manage to please me, I'll ensure your satisfaction as well, my dear aunt." "Ha ha ha." Amidst the cheerful laughter, Dragon Prince Artorius vanished without a trace, leaving behind a scorching frost and a wounded witch overwhelmed by a sense of defeat resonating within her. Author's note. Clarent was initially silver in color, but when it fell into Mordred's hands in canon, it transformed into an evil sword of hatred with a dark red color scheme. However, when wielded by Artorius, the sword took on a silver frost hue. Chapter 35, Obsession and Worry. Damn him, that bloody bastard! In the desolate and dilapidated castle, a beautiful woman lay on the ground, grinding her teeth and cursing the Pendragon's kin. This time it wasn't her father, sister, or children, but her newly met nephew. Though it was their first encounter, the animosity Morgan harbored towards him had already reached a level comparable to that of others. Of course, aside from hatred, Morgan's other feelings toward him were equally numerous and complex. I won't give up." Dragging her disheveled body, Morgan struggled to make her way to her magic workshop. The antidote to the poison on the dagger awaited her there. "I will definitely seek revenge on that guy." On her journey to the magic workshop, Morgan stumbled several times due to pain, fatigue, and a mix of pleasure. She even ended up with bruises and a swollen face after falling down the next set of stairs. But she persisted and finally arrived. She dared not perform any spells since her physical condition was too terrible at the moment, making it nearly impossible to concentrate. With such a disheveled body, forcing herself to use spells would undoubtedly lead to a tragic outcome. If it came to that, when they met next time, Artorius would not see his revenge-driven aunt, but rather a fallen figure, nothing more than a discarded puppet. I won't let it end like that. After stumbling and staggering, Morgan reached her magic workshop. Along the way, she fell once again, pushing her body to its limits. Gasping for breath, she fought off dizziness and overwhelming desires, making her way to the cabinet where the antidotes were stored, rummaging through the bottles and jars. Her once delicate fingers, adept at handling any materials, now trembled uncontrollably, and everything she saw seemed to spin before her eyes. I will come back for revenge. Finally, after carelessly knocking over numerous precious or dangerous potions, her trembling hand managed to grasp the bottle filled with the antidote. Morgan eagerly opened it and poured it into her mouth, emitting a satisfied ah sound. Immediately after came an intense surge of sensation. Her body began to recover. However, at the same time, the flames of passion surged higher. How should she put it? She had brought it upon herself. When concocting the poison, in addition to its paralyzing and weakening effects, Morgan had added a debuff, which made the victim get enchanted and horny. Originally, Morgan had considered various scenarios, envisioning her dear sister being captivated, her body weak and burning with a mix of hatred and anticipation, and looking at her with those eyes. But of course, once she decided to use it on Artorius, the character's image changed. Thinking about Artorius, her dear sister's good child, kneeling before her like a puppy, panting and licking her silk-clad legs, begging for her favor. No, if she entertained such thoughts further, she would lose herself. After a hee-hee-hee laughter, Morgan fell into a state of self-disgust, feeling utterly embarrassed by her recent actions. But once again, she had brought it upon herself. Even though she was desperately trying to endure, the more she resisted, the stronger the desire became. Although Morgan, as the creator of the poison, should have been well aware of its nature and effects, she subconsciously followed the predetermined path. She had set the trap for herself. Artorius! 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 Ah! The voice of the witch became hoarse as she called out her enemy's name. Gradually, bit by bit, her calls transformed into whispers. Exhausted and dehydrated, she collapsed, succumbing to the drowsiness that enveloped her. At the same time. Tap 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 tap. Mordred spun in circles, feeling increasingly anxious. Really? As one of Morgan's children, Mordred was no less cautious and distrustful of Morgan than any of her siblings. Will my brother be okay? Just moments ago, she was having dinner with her dear big brother, enjoying a candlelit meal together. After dinner, her brother would tell her stories, and then, well, you know. Today was supposed to be a wonderful day for Mordred. However, this beautiful day crumbled with Morgan's appearance. Her dear brother left with Morgan. Although Mordred had confidence in Artorius, well, it's Morgan we're talking about here. The most terrifying and wicked schemer, the most malicious woman in the world. And her big brother, Artorius. He was so gentle, so pure, so kind. How could he possibly be a match for Morgan? Would he face misfortune? Would he be targeted? After all, Morgan's fondness for King Arthur was so low to the point of hatred. Artorius as King Arthur's son surely would be hated by her too, right? So, what would she do to her own brother? Imprison him? Interrogate him? Beat him? Coerce him? Just the thought of it made Mordred feel like she was about to explode. She now deeply regretted her own powerlessness. Artorius and Morgan had been transported to who knows where through magecraft. She had encountered that kind of magecraft before. Her brother Artorius had even taught her, but she was too lazy and more interested in swordsmanship and spearmanship. So, her studies were half-hearted at best. Her brother had criticized her for it. The result? Mordred had learned to act cute and coquettish on her own to avoid her brother's scolding. Gah! If only I had studied magecraft properly before all this happened. With that, at least when she felt the urge to rush in and kill someone, she would know which direction to go. She could charge into a castle where Morgan was likely hiding and cause a commotion, rescuing her dear brother, instead of feeling helpless like she was now, just spinning in circles here. As time passed, her frustration grew and accumulated, driving Mordred insane to the point of pulling her hair and rolling on the ground. Fortunately, before she could embarrass herself any further, Artorius returned. Brother! Brother! Mordred rushed into Artorius's arms at lightning speed, examining him up and down while reaching out to check his body. How are you? Are you hurt? Are you hurt? Don't worry, little Mo, I'm fine. Watching Mordred fussing over him, Artorius extended his hand affectionately, stroking the kid's head. It was just Morgan, after all. She can't hurt me. Chapter 36, Frustration, I. In the face of his adorable sister, who trusted, admired, and loved him, Artorius naturally wanted to display his heroic demeanor. Even though he had been tricked by Morgan before due to his overconfidence and arrogance, Artorius conveniently omitted that part when recounting his encounter with Morgan to Mordred. He simply told Mordred that he was very strong and that Morgan, that person, was no match for him at all. Although Morgan had indeed tried to use tricks to harm him, Artorius mercilessly foiled her plans. In the end, Morgan could only plead for mercy while lying on the ground, severely dehydrated. Taking into account the fact that Morgan was his aunt and still had some usefulness, Artorius spared her life. He warned Morgan that if she ever dared to do bad things again in the future, she would face punishment similar to today's, or rather, even more dreadful punishment. Morgan tearfully promised Artorius that she would never cause trouble again. Only then did he forgive her and return to reunite with Mordred. Oh, so that's how it went. Brother, you're amazing. Indeed, Mordred was truly something. She wholeheartedly believed everything Artorius casually said without questioning. He found it amusing. Initially, Artorius felt a bit embarrassed treating her like that. But it was truly entertaining to fool Mordred. After all, his sister was so pure and adorable, like a cute creature from the feline race, or rather a lion cub possessing a deadly charm. It was necessary to treat her well, give her head pat, and play with her. Otherwise, it wouldn't do. Just as Morgan hated, her daughter had completely become Artorius's possession. All right. After teasing Mordred, exhaustion appeared on Artorius's face. After all, he had engaged in a vigorous activity with Morgan earlier. Even a dragon had to lower its head and rest for a while. Let's go to sleep and rest properly. Letting out a yawn, Artorius carried Mordred to their bedroom. There, he skillfully used the incense he obtained from Rome, rose essential oil expertly blended by the finest mages, to restore their physical and mental strength. After receiving a massage from her dear brother, Mordred also felt a bit tired. The desire to have Artorius spoil her reduced somewhat. Occasionally, just cuddling with her big brother's arm like this was enough. Seeing his peaceful sleeping face, akin to that of an angel, was already sufficient. My big brother. Mordred smiled and lightly kissed Artorius's cheek. Today was another wonderful day. Meanwhile. Still can't find it. Inside the office of Camelot, inside the White Castle. Even though it was deep into the night, the King of Knights remained wide awake. Artoria, possessing the factor of the dragon and the magic core of the red dragon, surpassed ordinary people in physical and mental capabilities. However, at this moment, she still felt exhausted. They still couldn't find it, the Holy Grail. No matter how they searched or dispatched the shrewdest and most powerful knights of the Round Table, they still couldn't find the legendary, all-powerful wish-granting device. No matter how they crossed plains, scaled mountains, or traversed oceans, the Holy Grail that could save Britain remained unattainable. Britain's conditions continued to deteriorate. The temperature was dropping, and the concentration of true ether was diminishing. People were starving, and monsters were restless. The kings and nobles of neighboring kingdoms whispered in secrecy. In such circumstances, all she could say to everyone was just hold on a little longer. Why all of these happened? What she should do? Artorius. With these thoughts in mind, Artoria once again remembered her beloved son. The son who had achieved great military feats in Europe. Her mood grew even worse. Over the past few years, Artorius had gained a reputation in Europe that surpassed her own, thanks to his agricultural knowledge, which was centuries ahead of the rest of the world, his iron-fisted rule, and his invincible military achievements. Even in Britain, the name of Dragon Prince could now rival that of the King of Knights. However, this reputation had its pros and cons. The people ruled by the Dragon Prince adored him, revered him, and feared him. His series of agricultural reforms, such as crop rotation, irrigation systems, storage techniques, and mixed planting methods, along with the promotion of cold and drought-resistant crops, ensured that the people under his rule never went hungry. His implementation of a system of military ranks, medals, and strict military laws motivated the armies to excel. By combining Germanic customary law with Roman law, revising and compiling them as the Artorius Code, implementing a more widespread system of officer selection, establishing schools, and promoting education, he brought prosperity to the Germanic regions under his rule. However, at the same time, the fear of political enemies, the bloody slaughter and suppression of enemy armies and rebellious nobles, instilled a tremendous sense of fear in people's hearts. Those who were not ruled by the Dragon Prince were suspicious of him, anticipating him, and fearing him. The Germanic peoples yearned for the prince's protection while dreading the might of his armies. On one hand, they envied the good life enjoyed by those under his rule, who were also Germanic tribesmen. On the other hand, they trembled in fear as his forces ruthlessly crushed the Germanic enemies on the battlefield. From the Roman perspective, Artorius was the empire's towering pillar of strength, supporting its golden beams across the sea. It was Artorius who had halted the relentless invasions of Burgundians, Vandals, Goths, Franks, Saxons, and other mad Germanic tribes, thus maintaining the stability of the empire. However, only the most foolish and ignorant individuals would see Artorius as a loyal servant of the empire, rather than a figure like Dong Taishi or Cao. In every Roman city, one of the classic topics of idle conversation among those with nothing better to do was, "When will General Artorius become the emperor? I hope it's today." Even beggars indulged in such fantasies. When Artorius marched towards Rome, the world would be shaken and transformed. The lines between nobility and commoners would be redrawn. The old order would collapse, and a new order would be reshaped. This was the greatest and final opportunity of their generation, one that no ambitious individual could afford to miss. Such was the perception of Artorius by outsiders. But not by Artoria. In her eyes, regardless of Artorius's actions and achievements, he was still that sweet child who would clutch onto her cloak and look at her with admiring eyes. He was the person she loved the most in this world, the one who needed her care. Artoria's level of love for Artorius was only second to her nation. Yet, the final outcome was that her beloved child had become a terrifying evil dragon who devoured lives. Chapter 37, Frustration, 2. Artorius's actions were highly controversial in the eyes of the public. Different perspectives emerged when it came to evaluating his deeds. As for the debates and arguments, Artorius himself could remain indifferent. However, the same cannot be said for Artoria. As a king who bore protection engraved in her very essence, she was highly displeased with her son's behavior. She believed that launching attacks on other nations and crushing tribes and nations for the sake of his own ambitions, bringing nations under his dominion, and even rebelling against the Roman emperor as his ruler, all of it was an act of evil. Yet, as someone who carried the title of King of Knights, she did not attribute the blame solely to Artorius. Instead, she blamed herself. She was a person who treated others with generosity but was strict with herself. Her integrity and righteousness were no jokes. They were not merely empty words. If only she could find a better way. If only she could find the Holy Grail sooner. If only she had paid more attention to Artorius's education. In short, she considered all the killings and chaos her son did as her own fault, feeling intense pain and regret. Another thing that caused her immense pain and would surely lead to future regrets was the fact that she couldn't stop Artorius in the present. She had no reason or standing to intervene in this continent's war. Moreover, Britain needed the Germanic war zone at the moment. In this era, with temperatures steadily dropping, known in history as the Little Ice Age, the entire Europe, or rather, the entire Eurasian continent, was shrouded in hunger and severe cold. The dying mystery of the Age of Gods was unable to resist the chilling influence emanating from the will of the planet. The human civilization that had developed on the foundation of mystery was utterly powerless against this natural disaster. Naturally, it became an era of survival of the fittest, where the new humans who were more adapted to the times devoured the ancient humans without hesitation. Relying on their flesh and blood, they endured the most difficult era and eventually established a dark and ignorant medieval world upon the ruins of Rome. Political systems, ideologies, technology, medicine, everything regressed significantly. It was nothing short of a living garbage heap. This chaotic and disastrous order persisted for centuries. It was an unbearable stretch of time. But this time, Artorius's appearance brought some relief to the dire situation. Food. Artorius possessed the most valuable asset in this era of famine. With agricultural techniques advanced by 1,500 years and an iron-fisted rule, he ensured one of the basic necessities of life for the people under his governance, even in the Little Ice Age. He held the largest food reserves in all of Europe. It was a strategic weapon even more formidable than his 5 legions and tens of thousands of elite soldiers. To prevent her own army, officials, family, and even herself from starving, Artoria had to rely on her son. She had to cooperate with him. Regardless of his instigations and enticements, she had to integrate her own people and the foundation of her country's military might, the excellent knights, into his forces. At first, it was only the disheartened and disillusioned individuals who joined him. However, with Artorius's remarkable success, more knights gathered under his banner. The Germanic war zone and the various nations of Britain became bound together. Therefore, even if Artoria mustered her courage, she could not act against her beloved child. That would be tantamount to suicide. So, my son has landed in Britain. Artoria, of course, knew about Artorius's landing in Londinium. But he hasn't come to see me. This disappointed Artoria greatly. He must be disappointed in me. Such a useless father. Although in reality, she was a mother, well, it wasn't so certain. But in the lonely night, Artoria gazed through the window into the distant starry sky, contemplating the ancient Britain of the Age of Gods. At that moment, she was not the king of knights revered by the Knights of the Round Table. She was not the ruler of Britain. She was merely a mother yearning for her child. Artorius. The next morning. I had a good dream. Artorius murmured as he opened his eyes and then turned to look at Mordred, who was sound asleep, hugging him tightly. She's really adorable. So innocent and pure, his own sister. In the past, Artorius would have taken his time to admire her for a while and then wake her up. But not today. It's not because of the intimate time he spent with Morgan last night but for other reasons. It was the dream. A beautiful, pure, and romantic dream, like a lily flower in full bloom. Because it was too pure and sweet. Is it because of Britain? Or because of father? Perhaps due to historical inertia, even though he had known for a long time that his father was his mother, Artorius sometimes still referred to her as such even when there was no one around. It's only temporary, I can't be by your side yet. Should he call it shyness toward his homeland, or was it due to other reasons? In any case, Artorius, who knew his mother's personality well, didn't want to meet her at this moment. They were walking different paths. Meeting her before his own career reached its peak would only make things worse. So, just endure a little longer. Artorius thought, soon, I'll be able to save you. Thinking this, he felt a sense of joy. The pure love he felt upon waking up had also dissipated. His feelings towards Mordred had also undergone a slight change. Over the course of more than 2 years spent together, his heart had gradually softened. The dream became a catalyst, leading him to truly embrace her as his sister and family, rather than just viewing her as a pawn or tool. She truly was his sister, so adorable. With that in mind, Artorius reached out and pulled his sister closer and woke her up as they soon began their morning training. T/N, Segs. A dragon never bows its head. Author's note. Artorius finally had some change of heart for his sister. Artorius, who treated his younger sister as a multifunctional tool, was a total jerk. Chapter 38, Return to Avalon. In the morning breeze of Britain, Artorius and his companions set off once again. They traversed the country, heading towards Wales. Artorius intended to board a ship there and travel to the Irish region in search of the woman mentioned by his dear aunt, the woman who could help him to usurp fate. That woman was none other than Queen of the Land of Shadows Scathatch. She possessed the primordial rune. As we journey, let's make a stop at Avalon again. It would be perfect if I can persuade Vivian. Artorius thought while observing his surroundings. Although it was May, the weather still felt like early spring. Occasionally, they came across pedestrians dressed inadequately, shivering in the cold. They seemed tired and lacked vitality. This was not solely due to poverty, hunger, and cold. The diminishing presence of true ether, the essence of the Age of Gods, played a significant role. The people of Britain, as inhabitants of the Age of Gods, relied on this factor as if fish couldn't survive without water. As the Age of Gods gradually faded away, their physical conditions naturally deteriorated. In contrast, there were the Saxons. Their spirits seemed far more vibrant compared to the Celts. Despite facing the same cold and hunger, they exuded an inexplicable sense of vitality. It was as if they were chosen. Well, in reality, they were indeed chosen. The process of racial integration needs to be accelerated. Artorius thought. In the Germanic regions under his control, policies regarding intermarriage between Celts, Germanic peoples, Romans, and Gauls were reasonably well implemented. He commanded a group of knights from Britain who actively worked towards this goal. They married noble daughters from Germanic, Roman, and Gaul backgrounds, setting an example for others. This led to a favorable pace of ethnic integration. Artorius had conducted experiments and found that these children, with mixed Germanic heritage, had hardly any physiological issues in the absence of true ether. He believed that with a few more generations of integration, the influence of the Age of Gods would completely fade away. The Celts of Britain would then become members of this human era, ruling the earth and becoming the dominant species. However, in Britain, without a strong central government to promote such policies, the pace of integration was frustratingly slow, relying solely on the spontaneous actions of the population. This won't do. Artorius thought. The Age of Gods is on the verge of disappearing. We don't have so much time to spare. To address this issue, I need to implement policies similar to those in the Germanic regions. And to implement such policies, I need to obtain political power. No, even with that, the progress would still be somewhat sluggish. So, should I employ better tactics? After contemplating for a few seconds, Artorius still believed that the leadership role was indispensable. As Dragon Prince destined to reign over Britain in the future, he should lead by example, charging forward and setting the standard. If it were Roman ladies, he could reluctantly consider them. But those Germanic peoples were somewhat. No, let's think positively. Maybe it's because I haven't found the right one? Look at Brynhildr from FGO, she's not bad, right? She's considered a Germanic, isn't she? So, for the sake of his grand plan, perhaps. Artorius began to seriously consider a plan to entice 10 or 8 Valkyries. As for whether her stories of tragic love with Sigurd would deviate because of this, he couldn't care less. Such matters would at most create a parallel world. No matter how you look at it, it wouldn't cause human civilization to stagnate and subsequently face the judgment of Alea. Let's give it a try. When I have some free time. No, it's better to send spies to gather intelligence first. After returning, I'll discuss it with Agravain. Agravain, the chief spy under Artorius's command, was one of the few individuals Artorius could trust completely. Although, in certain timelines of the future, this guy displayed an abnormal obsession with Artoria. But at least for now, he remained someone who prioritized national interest. He was the kind of individual who would resort to any means necessary to protect the country. For an outstanding ruler, such individuals were as essential as trusted ministers and capable generals. Send more scouts to the Germanic lands to gather information. If we can capture a few Valkyries, it will be even more advantageous. Yes, that's the decision, and it's quite delightful. By sacrificing oneself, His Highness is also doing it for the nation. I'm sure everyone who learns about the situation will be moved by that. Brother, is he pondering over strategies for governing the country and ensuring its security again? At the same time, Mordred, mounted on a warhorse beside Artorius, couldn't help but think that way. And she cast an admiring gaze at Artorius. Constantly pondering how to bring welfare to the people, shining with brilliant thoughts at every moment. As expected of brother. At that moment, Mordred was one of his subordinates who had been deeply moved by Artorius's dedication. In this era, are there any famous beauties in the Germanic region? Ah, I should have read more history books. As the son of Dragon, Artorius felt a strong sense of distress. At the same time, witnessing his brother's distress, Mordred also felt sorrowful, cursing her own foolishness for being unable to help her brother. So all she could do was silently pray, hoping that her brother would quickly find the right solution to the problem. Artorius, the Dragon Prince, led his armies forward without any hesitation. Before them, lay Wales, and across the sea was Ireland. Just the thought of finally meeting the Purple Lady, whom he had been longing for, made Artorius feel a bit excited. Of course, while marching, Artorius didn't forget to take a detour to Avalon. That utopia, far away from everything, couldn't be reached from a physical perspective, one could only approach it from a spiritual perspective. As the saying goes, where the heart desires, the body follows. To put it in simpler terms, Artorius simply thought about it and instantly appeared in Avalon's courtyard. It was safe to say it was very convenient. Artorius. And so, the next moment, Artorius, who had now turned 16 years old, transitioning from a pretty and attractive boy to a handsome and captivating youth, had a reunion with the fairy big sister, the Face's cleanser. Chapter 39, Love. In the Garden of Avalon, by the Azure Lake, amidst a vibrant sea of flowers, Artorius once again encountered the fairy. Artorius. It's really Artorius. Oh my goodness. Embracing Artorius tightly and rubbing against him, the woman who was desperately seeking attention was Vivian. The Lady of the Lake herself, a fairy big sister figure. She had beautiful silver long hair, like an adult version of Emilia from ReZero. Although Artorius was already an adult, she still treated him as if he were a child. While she was doing the usual face cleaning to Artorius, she spoke to him in a cheerful tone. You know, your big sister always waiting for Artorius to come here every day. I bake cakes and prepare tea every day, hoping that Artorius will come to me and we can do all sorts of fun things together. But at this point, the big sister with crimson eyes loosened her grip on Artorius a little, making sure he could look into her eyes. With her terrifying, dark, and intense gaze, she asked, "But why don't you come? Every day, your big sister waits for Artorius. Why don't you come? Why? Why? Why?" Her empty eyes looked directly at Artorius as if stared directly into his soul, as she continued again, "Your big sister waits for Artorius every day. Why don't you come? Do you dislike your big sister? Are you tired of your big sister? Your big sister will cry, you know. Hee hee hee, hee hee hee. Danger. Artorius. Danger." Artorius realized that something was off about the big sister in front of him. If he didn't find a way out, she would likely chop off his head and carry him into the lake while hugging him. "So. I miss you too, big sis Vivian." In the next moment, Artorius, with even more passion and emotion than the big sister, threw himself into her embrace. This kind of approach was not part of her plan. As a result, Vivian's functions momentarily paused. She was somewhat at a loss as she said to Artorius, "Even if you act like this and pout at me, I won't forgive you." Artorius completely disregarded her statement. "Oh, big sis Vivian, it's so great to see you again." He spoke to her in a slightly childish tone, not quite matching his 16-year-old self. He joyfully rubbed against her soft bosom, saying with a happy voice, "I never want to be separated from big sis Vivian again." Artorius. In an instant, the frustration, resentment, and various negative emotions that had built up over nearly 2 years of being ignored and forgotten in Avalon dissipated by about half. As she looked at the adorable boy in her arms, with his beautiful silky hair and eyes as beautiful as sapphires, the remaining fraction of negative feelings quickly faded away. But she still needed to clarify the situation. Why hadn't Artorius come to see her in these past 2 years? Of course, it was definitely not because Artorius had been preoccupied with his cute little sister and had disregarded the troublesome fairy big sister. It was because. It's because of work. I've been incredibly busy. I couldn't even make it back to Britain. Artorius wore a troubled expression on his face. Afterward, he turned to Vivian to pour out his grievances, magnifying every problem he had faced in the past 2 years by 10-fold or 20-fold. The harsh weather, the unforgiving environment, the savage barbarians, and the jealous Roman bureaucrats who constantly hindered his progress from behind. Faced with all of this, Artorius was just a child, weak, pitiful, and helpless. He could only suppress his urge to cry, just like the protagonist in a shonen anime, and move forward with his will, strength, and power of friendship. "I've been through so much hardship, big sis Vivian," Artorius said, and at the end, he collapsed into the arms of the fairy, taking a deep breath. After hearing his account, Vivian chose to forgive him. "It's truly been so tough." Looking at the adorable yet resilient boy, even a fairy couldn't help but feel a surge of affection. After all, this kind of emotion wasn't exclusive to humans alone. Gods, beasts, phantasmal species, and even monsters, all species capable of reproduction, experience love for their offspring. Fairies were no exception. Though they had never tried it, fairies as phantasmal species were evidently rich in emotions, with many of them being related to love. Despite their different thought processes, diverging from those of humans, the Lady of the Lake couldn't escape the fate of being deceived and used by Artorius because of love. "If it's so difficult, why continue?" Vivian asked. "Then, Artorius, stay in Avalon from now on. Be with me forever and ever. To dwell eternally in a timeless paradise far from everything, alongside the silver-haired, crimson-eyed fairy big sister." What kind of heaven was this? No, it was more like, what kind of hell was this? No matter how beautiful and well-shaped she was, because fairies had fragile principles, any form of jest could be entertained, but in the long run, it would become tiresome. In other words, no. Artorius appeared solemn and heroic, his eyes gleaming as if brimming with tears, as he gazed at the silver-haired, crimson-eyed fairy big sister. It's my responsibility, and I must take charge. I'm not just a prince of Britain, but also the overall leader of the Roman-Germanic war zone. My people need me, and I can't abandon them. So. As he spoke these words, Artorius once again threw himself into the embrace of his big sister. I've managed to find the time to come back to Britain and see you, big sis Vivian. There's absolutely no other reason. I simply wanted to see you again. Upon hearing Artorius's words, Vivian felt deeply moved instantly. She fully understood. Artorius, just like his father, the King of Knights, was a ruler who took his responsibility for his subjects very seriously. So, in such a chaotic external situation, he dedicated almost all his energy to governing the people and waging war, without any spare thoughts for matters of love and romance. His days were spent like an ascetic monk, resembling his father, a virtuous and upright king. He's still just a child. Thinking this, Vivian couldn't help but feel a pang of heartache. She believed that she owed this child a lot. Apart from that, the fairy big sister felt immensely happy. Even in such a busy and preoccupied state, Artorius had overcome countless obstacles to see her. What did that signify? Love. Of course, it was love. It represented Artorius's intense affection for her. When the person you love also loves you back, what could bring more joy to a fairy in this world? Chapter 40, Guilt. Before, as soon as Artorius laid eyes on the fairy Vivian, she was ready to assess the situation, either end their relationship or break his limbs and keep him as a collection. It was not without reason, since she had a bad experience with a certain bastard mage. Unfortunately, over the past 2 years, not only did Artorius significantly enhance his strength and skills, but his way with words surpassed the average for a ruler. His persuasive speech that never failed to amuse Mordred managed to charm the fairy of Avalon within minutes. Now, the silver-haired, red-eyed fairy no longer harbored anger toward Artorius. Instead, she felt guilty. She felt remorseful for witnessing the hardships Artorius had endured during these past 2 years while being unable to assist him. She felt sorry for him. With this sense of guilt, Vivian asked Artorius if there was anything she could do for him. The response from the kind-eyed youth deeply moved the fairy. He said, "I only want big sis Vivian to accompany me right now, it's enough." He truly isn't a fraud, just as I suspected. This response further diminished Vivian's wariness. He's nothing like that bastard named Merlin. Thus, Vivian's guilt towards Artorius increased even more. Despite him being such a good child, I was suspicious and worried that he deceived me. I really shouldn't have. Filled with apologies, gratitude, and the desire to make amends for the past, the silver-haired, red-eyed fairy warmly welcomed Artorius. She showed him firsthand the passion of a fairy. Although her efforts to make the dragon yield were in vain, she reluctantly bid farewell to Artorius. "Goodbye, big sis Vivian." During their parting, Artorius said to Vivian, "I will come to see you again." They made a promise to each other. Artorius would visit Vivian every few days during his stay in Britain. While this brought joy to the fairy, it also left her somewhat desolate. If possible, she wished she could stay by Artorius's side forever and ever. But it was not possible. At the end of the Age of Gods, as a fairy, she could hardly leave Avalon and adapt to a world without true ether. The fairy population in Avalon was approaching saturation, and that was one of the reasons. Even in Britain, known as the navel of the planet and the last remnant of the Age of Gods, the concentration of true ether was gradually decreasing, causing the decline of phantasmal species. When the white dragon that resided in Britain, named Vortigern, was alive, he would sometimes bring along some magical beasts and try to restore the Age of Gods. But now, Vortigern was dead, long gone. Even the concepts of White Dragon and King of the Island were handed over to Artorius. The former was upgraded by Artorius as the Frost Dragon, while the concept of phantasmal species decreased significantly, and the concept of titles increased substantially. It was similar to how Artoria Pendragon was known as the King of Knights by her title. As for the latter, Artorius treated it as a bargaining chip to entice a certain witch. After all, keeping such concepts had no benefits amidst the impending demise of the Age of Gods. Therefore, the current Vivian could only wait in the Avalon, hoping that her beloved boy would find time to visit her. She couldn't take the initiative. As for forcibly keeping Artorius by her side, Vivian, after all, was a great mother-class fairy. She was elegant and detached from mundane pleasures. Ordinary fairies, upon seeing Artorius, would merely desire to play and fulfill their physical needs. But Vivian was no ordinary fairy, she was an exceptionally powerful one. What she desired was not just Artorius's body but also dominance over his mind. Her thoughts were, during this time, I will support Artorius and make him feel my excellence. When he saves Britain or fails, he will come to me and we shall reunite. Perhaps ordinary fairies struggle to make the right choice between fleeting happiness and everlasting joy, but Vivian was clearly not that type of person. For now, she would endure and reap the rewards later. As a result, Artorius passed the test smoothly and returned happily to the real world of Britain. And upon returning, he acted as if nothing had happened. It was as if the friendly relationship activities with Vivian during their journey to Avalon didn't exist at all. Of course, when facing Mordred, Artorius was in a different state altogether. Though Mordred appeared silly and easily fooled on the outside, Artorius knew that she had been educated well and had become quite clever. Especially when it came to matters related to women, she had become very perceptive. With her skill in discerning various perfumes, powders, body scents, and floral fragrances, she could easily determine whom Artorius had encountered and who he had seen today. Was it a Roman noblewoman or a Germanic woman? Mordred felt no threat from such trivial matters. She could simply ignore them. Among the opposite sexes currently around her brother, the only one who made her feel somewhat threatened was Gareth. That wolf-like girl possessed the attributes of a dog, and she was both powerful and obedient. During their time in Britain, Gareth had achieved a series of victories against several top knights. She could hold her own against Gawain, the strongest knight in broad daylight, in a matter of hours. Her spearmanship was even on par with Lancelot, who was touted as the mightiest of the Round Table. This was her prowess in combat. However, when it came to appearance and figure, Gareth paled in comparison to Mordred. Mordred had an outstanding appearance, without a doubt. In terms of physique, although she lacked the rounded and plump appearance of mature women due to her age, if one looked at Morgan and the Artoria Lancer, it was clear that Mordred had great potential for future growth. It was only a matter of time before she acquired that captivating aura. Regarding this, Artorius had also told Mordred that although she might lack confidence in herself, she had complete faith in her dear brother. Whatever her brother said would come true. If her brother said she would have a great future, then she would undoubtedly have one. As for Gareth, Artorius wasn't too sure about her future. Perhaps, as Morgan's child, there might be expectations for Gareth's future as well? But it was uncertain. At least for now, compared to Mordred, who already had a peach-shaped figure and a beautiful back curve, Gareth seemed lacking in competitiveness. The only thing she had over Mordred was a pair of hands that could bring a smile to Yoshikage Kira's face, earning her the nickname Beaumains. However, even though Artorius claimed to be an all-fetish person who liked every fetish, he hadn't really developed a taste for hand-related fetish. In conclusion, the wolf girl was not a cause for concern. Mordred could continue to enjoy her brother's favor. But the feeling of unease grew within Mordred's heart. The fragrance emanating from Artorius was of a type that Mordred had never encountered before. It was the scent of a mature, seductive silver-haired and red-eyed fairy big sister. This made Mordred feel uneasy. Chapter 41, Usurp Fate Plan. Brother, are you hiding something from me? After Artorius went to Avalon, Mordred couldn't help but feel suspicious. Has he met another woman? The scent, though unfamiliar, feels strangely familiar. Mordred's thoughts were driven by the fact that Artorius imparted knowledge to her during their time on the continent of Europe, whereas his interactions with Vivian occurred while he was still in Britain. This made her feel both familiar and unable to discern the truth. If this situation continues, it will surely worsen. Suspicion will breed. And eventually, transform into jealousy and hatred. Mordred might turn into Mordred Alter, launching a rebellious act against her beloved big brother. But Artorius would never let that happen. To make such a thing occur, the seeds of suspicion must be discarded, and other seeds of emotions must be sown abundantly. Let Mordred continue, and forever belong to him. In other words, I went to find Vivian. Artorius openly confessed his grand plan to Mordred. Why did brother go to her? In other words, to alter fate. According to the proper human history of the type moon world, after the age of gods, the Roman Empire would fall into chaos and fragmentation. From the remains of the Roman Empire, various Germanic kingdoms would emerge. There were prototype kingdoms like the Ostrogothic kingdom, Visigothic kingdom, Vandals kingdom, and Lombards kingdom. After these prototypes collapsed due to the empire's counterattacks, the invasion of the Huns, and internal conflicts, the world entered the Middle Ages. It was during this time that the great and prosperous Germanic entities, which laid the foundation for the future, began to emerge. The Anglo-Saxons established England. The North Germanic peoples of Scandinavia invaded the islands, conquered Eastern Europe, and laid the groundwork for the future Russia as Kievan Rus. On the Iberian Peninsula, the remnants of the Visigoths and Suebi, along with the local Basques, took nearly 1,000 years to counterattack and successfully occupied the entire region of Spain. They would become the future Spaniards and Portuguese. The number of kingdoms established by the Germanic tribes was so vast, prosperous, and powerful that it became the stuff of dreams. However, if one were to ask who, in the Middle Ages after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, had gained the most benefits and established the most powerful, glorious, and magnificent dynasty in Europe as the Germanic peoples, everyone would choose the same name. Frank. Originating from the east bank of the Rhine, the Franks then swept across all of Gaul. After experiencing 3 dynastic changes, they occupied most of the territories of present-day Europe, including France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Switzerland, the core of Europe. In the Middle Ages, they were the most powerful, the core, and the most successful among the Germanic tribes. They seized the imperial heritage of the Western Roman Empire and became the Roman emperors, the epitome of the Germanic peoples. They were the Franks, the ancestors of Europe. What I want to usurp are the concept of Frank and the fate of Frank. Compared to Britain and the Roman Empire, which is fated to perish, why can't we become the fated victors, Mordred? Artorius's eyes shimmered as he spoke word by word to his most trusted sister, revealing his grand plan. Anglo-Saxons, the Germanic peoples who landed on the British Isles, are already within my grasp. But that's not enough. There are still thousands of years until the rise of the Anglo-Saxons. I don't want to wait that long. So, the Franks are the best choice. I discussed this topic with Morgan. She told me that, theoretically, it could be done. Though it's challenging, it's possible. But it requires a sufficient number of exceptional mages. At this point, if it were an ordinary person, they would surely be astonished by Artorius's terrifying and crazy ambition. What he desired wasn't salvation or clinging to the remnants of the old era in sorrow. It wasn't even about squeezing into the new era to secure a place among the ruling class. No, he simply wanted to usurp the most crucial fate of this era and make it his own. How audacious it was! However, the one Artorius faced was Mordred. She was the ideal subordinate he had educated and his most loyal sister. She had little interest in almost everything outside of Artorius. Fate, the so-called greatest things of the new era, or any kind of usurping all of these meant nothing to Mordred. So after Artorius finished speaking, Mordred had only one thought. Oh, so my brother went to find that woman not because of her silver hair, red eyes, and big chest which perfectly fit his type, but for a grand plan. If that's the case, then there's nothing to worry about. Those were words she kept inside, unable to voice them. As for the words she could say, she assured her brother, "Please rest assured, dear brother." Like the most loyal and resolute knight, Mordred knelt on one knee before Artorius, bowing to him. "I, Mordred Pendragon, shall assist in fulfilling your wish." Thus, Mordred's slight doubt about Artorius vanished into thin air. She remained Artorius's most loyal knight, his finest commander, his beloved sister, and his best companion. Observing such an indescribably loyal sister, Artorius felt not only relieved but also moved, filled with abundant love for her. Yet among these emotions, there was, of course, a tiny, insignificant, and inconsequential sentiment. That is, make little Mo happy, so that I can find time every day to go to Avalon and play with big sis Vivian without raising suspicion. And so, during the subsequent journey, Artorius went to Avalon every day, leaving Vivian utterly charmed by him. Several days passed like this before Artorius gradually began to change his demeanor and attitude. Every time he went to play with Vivian, he wore a worried expression. When the fairy big sister asked, "Artorius, what's going on?" Artorius chose not to tell her. This only fueled Vivian's curiosity, her desire for knowledge, and her thoughts of helping Artorius alleviate his worries to increase her likability in his heart. These desires grew stronger and stronger. Chapter 42, Ireland. Artorius, what's going on? Just tell me, please. In the Garden of Avalon, amidst a perpetual blooming flower sea, fairies witnessed a surprising scene under the warm and gentle sunlight. Among them, the strongest and most exceptional was Vivian, the Lady of the Lake, who acted like a little girl, playfully pestering a youth of around 16. It was a rather indescribable feeling. Fairies, these creatures, some were as tiny as butterflies with insect-like wings and miniature figurine-like bodies, cute and fantastical. They were innocent, lively, and mischievous, just like children. But there were also some, the powerful ones, with proportions akin to humans, and among them, the most formidable possessed unparalleled wisdom. Just like Vivian. Vivian wasn't like those half-hearted fairies that always boasted, "I'm the smartest," when in reality was a fool. No, she was the real deal, possessing top-notch intelligence. She was admired by the fairies, as an exceptional and clever big sister. One could even say she was the queen of the fairies. That's why Vivian always carried herself with grace and elegance in front of the fairies. She was the admired big sister. Never did any fairy imagine that their exceptional and wise big sister would make such a cute gesture towards a human boy named Artorius, even though he was indeed cute in their eyes. But can someone really be judged solely based on cuteness? Well, considering the simple thought process of fairies, they probably wouldn't understand. It had been 5 or 6 days since Artorius had been troubled, unwilling to reveal the situation to Vivian, and now, her curiosity and concern regarding Artorius had reached its peak. Despite being a queen, a goddess, and a big sister, Vivian was still a fairy. Her curiosity was not inferior to that of any other fairy. To satisfy her curiosity, it wouldn't hurt to act cute in front of Artorius. Of course, only in front of him, others were out of the question. It's nothing. Artorius resisted as usual. He displayed a forced smile while declining Vivian. "I don't want to trouble you with this, big sis Vivian." Artorius's response showed progress compared to the previous days. A few days ago, he simply told Vivian, "It's nothing." Now, he said, "I don't want to trouble you." After uttering those words, Artorius promptly vanished, leaving Vivian alone, sulking. "What on earth? Obviously you are already a lover of this big sister, yet you still hiding something from big sister. Really? Really? You're not being a good boy." As she grumbled, Vivian vented her dissatisfaction with the flowers and plants around her. Her delicate feet kicked the ground. However, after pondering for a short while, Vivian made a decision: she would forgive him. Yes, she had decided to forgive Artorius. It wasn't just because he was adorable or kind-hearted and well-behaved. It was because Artorius, by concealing things from her, was actually for her own good. Despite facing difficulties himself, he worried about burdening her. Such a child was truly, truly precious. "I will definitely help him." After Artorius left, Vivian felt happy for a while and made a decision. Since he treated her so well, she was determined to wholeheartedly repay him. Meanwhile, "Brother, did something good happen to you?" Mordred asked curiously by Artorius's side. Observing Artorius involuntarily smiling, Mordred became slightly curious. "Yet," Artorius replied. "The plan to convince the fairy Vivian has moved on to the next stage." "I see," Mordred said, realization dawning on her. As usual, her brother didn't deceive her and chose to share all the secrets and plans with her, even during their journey to Ireland. At the moment, they were already aboard a ship, enduring the turbulence of the waves while the excellently designed longship, with its raised dragon head, sailed bravely forward. This type of ship, invented by the Norsemen, gained significant fame in later times because of the Vikings' extensive use. Despite being a type of sail and/or vessel like their counterparts in the Mediterranean, it was better suited for navigation in the stormy North Sea. In later years, Viking adventurers even relied on these ships to sail the Arctic Ocean and eventually reached the New World. Artorius, commanding a considerable number of Germanic peoples, naturally adopted this ship, best suited for the North Sea, as the standard equipment for the Germanic army. They made some modifications to the ship's design. "Land!" At that moment, a sailor standing on the lookout shouted excitedly. This announcement made the rowers even more enthusiastic. Artorius preferred using free sailors over slaves. Although they were harder to control, Having more combatants in naval engagements was always a welcome advantage. "We have arrived in Ireland," Artorius informed Mordred, saying, "The next step is to proceed to the land of shadows." The Dragon Prince spoke confidently, harboring some anticipation for what would happen next. "After all, who doesn't love that purple lady?" Half an hour later, the longship, with its shallow draft, ran aground on a sandbar. Sailors armed with various weapons, pirates and soldiers cheerfully disembarked onto Ireland's isolated land, which had little connection with the continent since ancient times. Although the region had experienced Roman influence and been inhabited by Celts who migrated from Britain, politically, economically, and culturally, Ireland remained independent. It had always been a land of divided factions. Small kingdoms constantly battled each other, never achieving unity. If history is correct, this chaotic situation would persist for centuries until Britain eventually annexed it. But now, perhaps there's another possibility, Artorius pondered. It's just a remote corner of Europe, an inconsequential place. In the end, it will also be an addition to Britain. Even if we bring it under control and annex it now, won't it trigger any adverse consequences to fate, right? Chapter 43, Wrong Place. Poor Irish people, the last refuge of the Celts, were still unaware of how their future would become glorious due to the impromptu decision of the Son of Dragon. Of course, not as Ireland, but as part of the great empire of Artorius, a county in the province of Britain. In present-day Ireland, four powers stood side by side: Leinster, Munster, Connaught and Ulster, the four small kingdoms, constantly engaging in various alliances and intrigues, like a miniature version of the Middle Ages. However, no matter how they maneuvered internally, they dared not offend any powerful existence, especially someone like Artorius. Knights serving under Artorius hailed not only from Britain but also from some Irish Celts. There was also some trade between the Germanic regions under Artorius's control and Ireland. So, after landing, when Artorius dispatched envoys announcing his intention to visit the land of shadows, the rulers of Ireland's small kingdoms all submitted obediently. They eagerly sent envoys, willing to act as guides. Becoming a vassal state of Rome was not a problem either. However, the situation changed upon hearing that Artorius's goal was the land of shadows. "There's no way to enter the land of shadows." Artorius furrowed his brow as he faced a sweaty and visibly fearful Irish envoy. The location was Dublin. Of course, it wasn't called Dublin yet. The city was built during the Viking era in its original history, but that didn't matter anyway. In Dublin, the messenger who met with Artorius brought bad news. "Yes, great General Artorius, that's how it is," the Irish envoy replied with a forced smile. "In recent years, Queen Scathatch hasn't recruited any disciples and hasn't appeared in Ireland. You know, the land of shadows is a place we ordinary people cannot enter. Normally, those who go to the land of shadows are invited by Queen Scathatch herself, so." Artorius inquired further and visited some of Scathach's former students in Ireland. The youngest of these students was already over 60. From them, Artorius confirmed that Scathach's activities had gradually diminished over 30 years ago. Is it because of the demise of the Age of Gods? Artorius wondered. He knew Scathatch managed to live through to the present, but being alive didn't mean she could freely act in the mortal realm. "So, what should we do next, brother?" Mordred asked anxiously, observing Artorius deep in thought for several days. "This is a problem indeed," Artorius replied. Before leaving, Artorius handed over the intelligence and spy organization to Agravain. As for internal affairs, he entrusted the administrative system he personally planned for the Germanic regions. This ensured the stability of the Germanic regions for a certain period. However, this was still an era primarily governed by individuals, an era centered around bloodlines, heroes, and strength. If the core supporting this system, Artorius, were to remain abroad for an extended period, the situation would become uncertain. "I definitely need to find a solution," Artorius thought and made a decision. "If we can't obtain news of Scathatch in a short period, we'll leave behind some intelligence personnel and envoys to continue the search in Ireland. Then we'll return to the Germanic regions. The time required to sail from Ireland back to the Germanic regions wouldn't be too long. It wouldn't significantly delay their plans." "Well, okay," Mordred said. Since Artorius had made up his mind, Mordred settled down. The group then began searching the lands of Ireland for traces of the land of shadows. Until one night, when, after telling Mordred a modified fairy tale, Artorius also entered the realm of dreams. In the dream, Artorius followed his thoughts and headed toward Avalon. Upon waking up, he had to take care of Mordred, but once he fell asleep, he would go to Vivian and act spoiled. If he were just an ordinary human, he would have probably withered and died long ago. But Artorius, being the son of dragon, was different. A dragon never bows its head. When his mother, Artoria, who was still immature at the time, was an apprentice knight, she would train diligently during the day and receive education in kingship from Merlin while asleep. The current Artorius is an enhanced version compared to the Artoria Lily of the past. Naturally, he is unstoppable. Now, I can confront Big Sis Vivian, he thought as he moved forward. The path in the dream is determined by one's state of mind. It can be long or short. However, this time, Artorius felt like he had been walking for a long time without encountering the floral sea from his memories. Did I take the wrong path? No, can the path in a dream be wrong? Pondering over this question, Artorius started to feel a bit annoyed. Just as he was contemplating what to do next, a lush forest appeared ahead. Birds were singing, and small animals like rabbits and squirrels were hopping around. Artorius could also hear the sound of flowing water. Does Avalon have a place like this? I haven't been here before. Thinking this, he approached the area with a curious feeling. And then he heard it. It was the hum of a girl. A scene that was famous in works of art. A girl with long, pink hair and delicate skin was bathing in the waist-deep water of a spring. She had her back turned to Artorius, so he could only see the curve of her back. It was something that could make him couldn't help but whistle. It was on par with Mordred, if not surpassing her. If they were to be distinguished, Mordred had a more toned and smooth figure due to her training, and her skin was slightly healthier in complexion. While the girl with her back to Artorius appeared softer and had fairer skin. Both were beautiful in their own ways. As Artorius thought this, he turned around to leave. Although his inner desires befit the name of a dragon, Artorius, in general, was a gentleman. He would not engage in voyeuristic behavior. He quietly left, not letting the other person notice his presence. That was Artorius's decision. However, before that happened. Is someone there? A pure voice with a hint of seduction came through. He had been discovered. As Artorius thought this, he halted his steps and faced the girl in the spring, who was completely exposed. As a ruler and an iron-fisted leader, he was undoubtedly a gentleman, but he was not a pushover. He wouldn't panic. Thus, they maintained eye contact for 2 minutes. Chapter 44, Pink-haired Seductress. Such a handsome child, the woman said. Although she wasn't wearing anything, the woman with pink long hair and a gentle face smiled, giving off a remarkably sweet appearance. She seemed completely not embarrassed. With that body and that face, it was as if she were born to entice men. She was a natural beauty, indeed. Different from Mordred, Morgan, or Artoria, and even different from Vivian. Mordred was not only a girl but also an excellent warrior, a versatile talent trained by Artorius, and an outstanding commander. Morgan, aside from being a woman, was a powerful witch, a mage. Vivian could be considered a fairy queen, and Artoria, needless to say, was the king of knights. However, now, smiling and looking at the woman in front of him with great interest, Artorius couldn't discern her status or anything else with his ability that resembled appraisal. Knight, swordsman, mage, commoner, villager, noble, little sister, lady, big sister, this woman didn't have any of those attributes. Artorius wasn't just boasting, over the past few years, he had significantly honed his ability. If he were to guess, he would likely be correct 8 or 9 times out of 10. But, at this moment, it seemed like this ability had lost its effect. Apart from being a female, Artorius couldn't see anything else. There were 2 possibilities. The first possibility was that this woman had an incredibly strong feminine power. So her profession and characteristics were inherently female, or rather, female itself. The other possibility was that this woman possessed a powerful affinity for magic, or she was skilled in magecraft. Thus, she concealed her own characteristics. Regardless of which possibility it was, neither was an easy one to deal with. Artorius thought to himself and then asked the beautiful woman in front of him, "Big sister, are you a fairy?" Saying such words, Artorius adjusted his demeanor to that of an innocent, naive, and cute boy. It was his natural defensive behavior when dealing with unfamiliar big sisters. As for the question about the fairy, it was a kind of test. Artorius had seen many fairies in Avalon or Britain. Some were as small as butterflies, and others were a bit larger, like figurines. The most powerful fairies probably had the proportions of a legal lily. Fairy big sisters like Vivian were few and far between. Artorius hadn't encountered many of them so far. No, not a fairy. The other person said, smiling gently at Artorius. Then, besides fairies, are there other beings in Avalon? Like goddess? Artorius proposed another hypothesis. No, not that either. She replied with a smile, getting closer to Artorius as the sound of water flowed. Well, even though many people say I have a beauty resembling that of a goddess, I am indeed a human, you know, she said as she approached, gradually revealing more of her figure. The natural and aesthetic feeling emanating from her had a considerable impact on Artorius. This person truly is a seductress. Artorius thought to himself. While he had this thought in his mind, the pink-haired seductress happily approached the shore. She was getting closer to Artorius. At this proximity, Artorius had to maintain his innocent boyish image and acting. So, even though he wanted to push this big sister down and scold her for being shameless, he just turned his head slightly, blushing, as if he wanted to see but didn't dare. This attitude pleased the pink-haired seductress. Little brother, she intentionally put on a sad expression and said to Artorius, don't you like big sister? Isn't big sister pretty? Pretty. Artorius, who pretended as the pure, introverted, and shy boy, replied with a bashful tone, I've never seen such a pretty big sister before. This was a lie. Based on Artorius's standards, this woman was indeed exceptional. However, she didn't surpass the women in his own family. Moreover, in this short moment, Artorius had a daring guess. He figured out who this woman was. Well, if that's the case, why don't you take a good look at big sister? No, it's not right. Artorius spoke this time with conviction, saying, as a knight, it's inappropriate to be disrespectful to women. If it were the 12-year-old Artorius, he could have answered, because mother said it's not right, continuing to emphasize his showed cuteness. But if 16-year-old Artorius said that, it would feel a bit fake. So he used such a firm and righteous way of speaking. I see, such a cute little knight. I'm not little, I'm already 16. In answering this question, Artorius also displayed the stubbornness and persistence typical of boys his age. When he said that, he unconsciously opened his eyes and looked at the other person. With wide open eyes, he quickly turned his head again, saying, please put on your clothes first before speaking. Yes, you're not a child anymore. The big sister with pink hair smiled happily. So don't worry, I'm already dressed, you know. So please open your eyes and look at me, my cute knight. I see. Artorius breathed a sigh of relief and then opened his eyes. Yes, she had indeed properly put on her clothes. A fluffy white outfit, boots, a white crown, and a garment that resembled a highly revealing swimsuit more than clothing, showing off a lot of skin. Should I say it's worthy of type Moon World? Even though it's the medieval era, they have such modern attire, what nonsense. Artorius rolled his eyes in his mind and continued his acting. After pretending to be stunned for a while, Artorius then pretended to panic, closed his eyes, and waved his hands in front of him, as if trying to slap something away. What? Artorius shouted loudly while feeling like he had grabbed 2 soft marshmallows with his hands. Then came the happy yet erotic hum from the big sister. In this delightful hum, her fondness for Artorius once again increased significantly. Of course, this was also part of his calculation. Chapter 45, Medb. Queen Medb. The queen of the kingdom of Connaught felt like she had hit the jackpot. But, to have called her the Queen of Connaught was already a thing of the past. It had been quite a while since then. In any case, now she, like anyone who had left a significant mark in the Age of Gods, possessed sufficient power and had no desire to die, had arrived at the reverse side of the world, that incredibly boring place. Medb felt extremely frustrated, almost going mad. If this boredom continued, she might as well just commit suicide. Although, after committing suicide, there was no way to continue making love in the Throne of Heroes. After all, she had heard that the heroic spirits in the Throne of Heroes, under the control of suppression, were actually quite dull and monotonous. But at least there would have been some feeling, right? All the good men from ancient times, the past, the present, and the future, all existed on the throne of heroes. Just thinking about it made her happy. So Medb had already made a decision. If this boredom continued for a few more years, she would commit suicide. Of course, now that she was feeling frustrated and wanting to die, it had disappeared. Because she had encountered a handsome boy. A very innocent and pure one. A prince who perfectly complemented her girlish, dreamy pink color. With beautiful pale platinum hair, splendid silver frost armor, and innocent, lively sky blue eyes. He was the most attractive, adorable, and handsome male she had ever seen. Have the gods answered my prayers and sent this child to me? He. The current Medb no longer wanted to die at all. What she desired now was to love and possess this innocent boy. With such thoughts in her heart, the romance had already begun, and the queen was happily overwhelming the boy by pressing him down. She could sense that this boy possessed great strength, not inferior to any great heroes she had seen before. He might have even surpassed that guy and excelled beyond measure. But because she was a cute big sister and he had smelled the soft scent emanating from her at close proximity, the boy didn't want to harm her. He didn't use force and allowed her to overpower him. Artorius, Medb felt triumphant in her heart and enjoyed the boy's weak protest of "let go of me." While pressing him down, she felt like she was about to burst with pleasure. What an incredible child! While pretending to be shy, Artorius also didn't forget to adjust his attitude. Since he was the type of character who adheres to his beliefs but still has desires. Before, he would protest, close his eyes, and even act shy. Now, he raises his spear high to show respect. My feeling the size of his spear, Medb reveals a joyful expression. Although in her heart, she wishes she could do this and that to him right now, she obediently gets up from him. The reason she acts this way is that Medb also has her own aesthetic sense. If she were to force things now, the boy on the ground would probably hesitate and resist. What was the fun of that? Well, she wasn't a twisted, perverted nymphomaniac. It was something completely incompatible with her aesthetics and pleasure. Regardless, she wouldn't do anything to spoil the mood in front of such an attractive boy. So, she had to use seduction. She would make this adorable young knight hers, both body and soul. Then she could slowly indulge herself. Days in the reverse side won't be boring at all. Phew. She thought happily, although I don't know why this child ended up here, now that he's in my hands, he belongs to me. She had a certain feeling. Even though she had lost everything, all her lovers, beloveds, husbands, fiancés, and the like, as long as she had this boy by her side, she was the victor. A feeling emerged in her mind. This child's worth exceeds that of Cuculain. It made her lose herself for a moment. Now, what should be the next step in my conquest? While Artorius pretended to be cautious and shy, she changed her swimsuit-style clothes to a beautiful velvet coat. She also playfully swung a small whip, making a snapping sound. Though it still looked a bit off, at least she was dressed. Seeing this scene, Artorius sighed in relief. He maintained a calm demeanor and introduced himself. My name is Artorius Pendragon. I am the Prince of Britain, as well as a general and leader in the Germanic army of the Roman Empire. As he spoke these words, the aura of a general, a dictator, and a mighty warrior flashed briefly, making Medb's eyes sparkle. A powerful male was also a bonus for her. Then, big sister, may I ask where this place is, and who are you? If it was a strong, handsome, and innocent boy, then it couldn't get any better. Artorius had two effective attacks against Queen Medb. One was an attack against older ladies, and the other was an attack against femme fatale who longed for love. Or perhaps it was precisely because of the existence of these attacks that Artorius always attracted these peculiar women everywhere. Phew. After admiring the attractive boy for a while, Medb replied cheerfully to his question, "This is my home, my cute knight, as for how you got here I don't know. All I know is that ordinary humans cannot reach this place, and even if they do, they can't return." What? Can't return? Or let's say it's very difficult to return. Although in reality, by now Artorius had already interpreted the dream more than 50%. But he continued to pretend to be surprised and said to Medb, "That won't do, I must go back. Don't worry too much, young one. I will help you find a solution. In that case, thank you so much, Just call me Medb." "Well, big sister." Medb. Hearing the sweet, affectionate way the boy called her name, Medb felt extremely happy. So she proceeded with the next step of her plan. But before that, why don't you take a little rest? As she said that, she took out a honey-scented wine jug and looked at Artorius expectantly, thinking about the pleasurable development to come, drinking wine, entering a state of intoxication, and then, being completely devoured by her. He. However, things didn't unfold as she had expected. Artorius didn't agree, nor did he continue to act innocent. Instead, he looked at her with a strange gaze. That gaze seemed to say, "Is that all?" Chapter 46, Disappointing. With his knowledge of magecraft and the potential to become a caster in the future, Artorius immediately recognized the ingredients and purpose of the honey wine that Meb had produced. His gaze toward her instantly became slightly grim. Knowing that she was Meb and aware of her reputation, Artorius was willing to engage with her in this inexplicable situation, either to indulge in her company or to seek a technical exchange. Meb relied on her charm to manipulate men and achieve success, while Artorius was quite the opposite by using his charm on women. In a way, they were colleagues. So, it was normal to desire to acquire some techniques from a fellow practitioner, wasn't it? That was why Artorius pretended to be an innocent boy from the start. He wanted to see how Meb seduced men, how she enticed them, and how she used her language, abilities, and strategies to manipulate them. All these things could be incorporated into his own skill set. By the time he woke up the next day, he would be able to bring happiness to Mordred as well. Even in a situation like this, I haven't forgotten about my sister. I truly am a good brother. Artorius felt a sense of pride in his heart. While Artorius did exploit women to his advantage in this chaotic age, he had no choice due to the limited options available to him at the moment. Utilizing his charm, which proved to be the most effective tool at his disposal, became necessary for him to achieve his goals. In return, he ensured their happiness, as he did with his little sister Mordred, for instance. It could be said that he altered her fate as a traitor, preventing her from meeting her demise at the hands of her father. He even sacrificed his own body for Vivian's happiness. However, the reality is often disappointing. Is this it? Where were the promised techniques? Where were the persuasive words and the strategies? Did she go straight for an aphrodisiac? Is this all? What a waste of time. This woman. How disappointing. Artorius's expression grew gloomy. Hey, what? Meb exclaimed in surprise while Artorius stood up and looked at her with eyes akin to those assessing trash. I thought as a legendary queen, you would bring forth profound insights. Yet, you present such vulgar items. Meb, wah. Though she didn't understand why, after Artorius spoke so vehemently all of a sudden, Meb felt quite guilty. She had a feeling that she might suffer a heart attack, cough up 3 liters of blood, and die. This sense of guilt intensified as Artorius continued. The decline of the Age of Gods, Gaia's calamity, leading to the successive rise of Germanic tribes then seized Rome and brutalized its inhabitants. Consequently, the Senate was filled with rotten officials, while beasts feasted upon the temple's offerings. Well, these things don't seem to have much to do with you, I suppose. Meb, what are? Shut up, you vulgar bitch, how dare you bark at me? Her small protest was completely ignored by Artorius. He continued righteously. Your life story, I am well aware of it. You are the Queen of Connaught, known as the Passionate Maiden, the Eternal Lady. When this gorgeous prince arrives, you should have responded gently, enjoyed a romantic rendezvous, shared your hearts, and... Meb, isn't it troublesome to go through all that? Why don't we skip the formalities and get straight to the point? Enough. Hearing Meb's words, Artorius's dissatisfaction grew even stronger. You were supposed to help me. Yet, you resorted to aphrodisiacs, intending to deceive me. Your crimes are grave, and the heavens and earth won't tolerate you. Meb, what? Aren't you exaggerating? Her small protest was once again disregarded by Artorius, who continued righteously summarizing his thoughts to Meb. Queen of Connaught. You pink slut have long departed to the reverse side of the world, so what right do you have to seduce me? I have never seen such shamelessness. After uttering these words, Artorius turned and walked away without looking back, leaving behind a startled Meb to continue standing in place, stunned. What just happened? As she regained her senses, she realized that she had been tricked by Artorius. He had scolded her and then disappeared without a trace. She remained in a daze for a while, pondering the situation. Did this boy see through me, and rejected me? No, that's not right. He even tricked me. He wasn't charmed by my allure at all. No, it's more like he thinks I'm a fool. I've been humiliated by that little bastard. Med was on the verge of going mad. From her appearance, it seemed as though Artorius had committed an unforgivable act. If Artorius were to appear before her at this moment, she would undoubtedly teach him a lesson in her own unique way. Bastard, that Artorius! I'll remember you. I will seek revenge. Mark my words. I absolutely must make him mine. At the same time, as Artorius moved forward, leaving behind the spring where Med was bathing, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. If she could read his mind, Med wouldn't have been so angry. Her charm was still effective on Artorius, to some extent. It just wasn't as effective as she had hoped. If only I hadn't been so decisive in leaving. Even if I couldn't learn any seduction techniques, I could have at least enjoyed a free service. What's so bad about that? After all, I wouldn't take any responsibility. Damn, I regret it. Is it too late to turn back now? After contemplating for a few seconds, Artorius ultimately decided against it. Losing face for the sake of his dragon spear satisfaction wasn't worth it, indeed. And that woman is probably holding a grudge against me. If there's a chance in the future, she'll likely cause trouble. But oh well, she's trapped in the reverse side, and she's not a god. She'll probably die in another 2 years and head to the throne of heroes. It's not that easy to meet again, right? With that thought in mind, Artorius cast Med beside and began pondering other matters. The place he was in right now was indeed a dream. However, it wasn't the way guiding toward Avalon. Artorius pondered, is it because I'm in Ireland that the situation has changed? Could it be, that the connection lies within the reverse side changing to a place associated with Ireland? Was that why I came to the holy spring where Med is located? If that's the case, Artorius thought of a possibility. If that's true, could I also reach the land of shadows through this method? Maybe I can give it a try. Artorius made up his mind. With thoughts like land of shadows, land of shadows, land of shadows in his mind, he moved forward. But it had no effect. Did I get it wrong? After thinking for a moment, he decided to try a different approach. Purple granny, purple granny, purple granny. As Artorius thought this, he moved forward. Deep down, he felt certain that he would definitely get scolded by the purple lady. Regardless, his mission to find a way to the land of shadows was accomplished. I truly am a genius. With this cheerful thought in mind, Artorius walked forward happily. But, gradually, he began to hear Mordred's voice in his ears. Brother, brother, brother. The voice grew clearer and clearer. Don't bother me, little Mo. Your brother is busy doing important things. After uttering these words, Artorius woke up. Chapter 47, Return. He remained to lie on the bed inside the military tent, with Mordred by his side. Although Mordred only revealed her identity as a knight, she couldn't continue sharing a tent with Artorius. However, sneaking in quietly at midnight was still possible. Every morning, Artorius waking her up was one of Mordred's happiest moments, second only to the daytime training and night training. But today, Mordred sensed something was wrong. Until now, Artorius hadn't woken up yet. Feeling a bit worried, she could only resort to physical means to wake him. Of course, that was after trying magical means with no effect. Mordred. Artorius woke up. Sorry, brother. But if you don't get up soon, everyone else will be awake. As she spoke, Mordred turned around. I'll go back first. You should hurry too, brother. After saying that, Mordred silently left, leaving Artorius alone. It's already this late. Artorius also sat up. He quickly put on the scattered clothes nearby. Then, he yawned and stood up, walking out of the camp. It was still early morning, and hardly anyone had woken up yet. They were in a jungle by the roadside. Apart from Artorius, Mordred, and the guides and messengers from Ireland, there were hardly any people around. The soldiers had been left behind by Artorius at the landing site. Artorius had requested them to establish a stronghold there. This stronghold would become the Empire's future base for trade, invasion, and colonization of Ireland in the future. Currently, it was mainly used for trade and cultural exchange. After wandering outside for a while, Everyone began to wake up. They started cooking their food in the marching pot. It was a simple one-pot dish, along with some porridge and coarse grains. It was a watery soup. Apart from being freshly satisfying, it didn't offer many advantages. But for the soldiers and people of this era, it was already a rare delicacy. In addition to the fresh porridge soup, breakfast included game hunted from the woods and biscuits brought along. The former was skewered and grilled over the fire, while the latter was torn into pieces and thrown into the soup to soften before eating. In this era of abnormal global climate, every bit of food had to be conserved. Even the Germanic military district, which possessed agricultural technology surpassing the era by 1,500 years, had to do the same. Perhaps in another 2 years, with more cultivated land being opened up, the situation would improve. Currently, most of the Germanic regions still relied on traditional methods of farming/and-burn agriculture. Changing all of that wouldn't happen overnight. Speaking of which, this land belongs to Connaught now. During breakfast, the Irish guide playfully winked at everyone, seemingly preparing to share a local legend. Speaking of Connaught, the most famous figure is undoubtedly the legendary Queen Medb. He cheerfully and endlessly recounted the exploits of this widely known queen, especially the stories between her and Cu Chulainn, the son of Ireland. By the way, this place used to be Queen Medb's palace. It is said that occasionally, people still catch glimpses of Medb here. Really? It's been so many years. Probably just a scam. Next, the guide's assurance and everyone's doubts had become meaningless. Artorius didn't want to listen any further. Is it because of this reason that I saw Medb last night? Artorius thought to himself, then gave the command. We won't search any more. We'll return to Britain tomorrow. Although Artorius's followers found it strange, they didn't dare to object. The Irish guide, on the other hand, felt a bit anxious, worried that he had done something wrong, causing dissatisfaction to the influential figure from the foreign country. If the figure were unhappy, would he be implicated? Of course, Artorius didn't really care about the thought of an ordinary guide. The Britain exploration group happily departed in this manner. Shortly after their departure, a certain person, mockingly referred to by Artorius as the vulgar bitch and the pink slut, came riding in a metallic chariot with a menacing presence. Where is he? Where is he? Surrounding her were soldiers created in large quantities using her blood and genetic factors. This magecraft product of the Age of God couldn't exist in present-day Ireland for too long. So she had to act quickly. Where did that brat, who refused to defile my body, run off to? Damn it, I won't let him get away. I must capture him and give him a proper education. Furious with her eyes bloodshot, she searched the forest where Artorius and his group had camped several times, inside and out. But she found nothing. This only made her angrier. Yesterday, at the reverse side of the world, she had pondered over it. In the end, the more she thought, the angrier she became. After Artorius left and a brief moment of chaos ensued, she understood everything. From the beginning, she had been deceived, completely deceived. That boy had been a comrade from the very beginning. The shyness he had shown before was all an act. The reason for that act was to fool herself, gather information, and conquer her. But when she presented him with the bewitching wine, the boy turned on her immediately. Because she skipped the steps and went straight for the outcome, making the child find it disappointing. Mere physical relations were not his pursuit. So he ridiculed her and walked away. Damn it, I must get my revenge. I will make him experience the wailing and tearful acknowledgement of his mistake, bowing down before this queen's might. She vowed solemnly, thinking like this. However, since she couldn't find him, she could only continue her impotent rage. Garg. Like that. At the same time. Returning to Britain, I will find that white-haired shady mage. It's the final piece of the puzzle. Artorius, riding on his warhorse, travelled at the fastest speed while thinking like this, surveying his surroundings. Just like Britain, Wales and Ireland were also the last home of the Celts. This needs a slight correction. Previously, Artorius believed, along with certain literary works and the concept of the counterforce, that the Age of Gods had ended with the complete annihilation of the Celts. However, this belief is not entirely accurate. Because in places like Britain, Wales and Ireland, tucked away in the corners, Celts still exist. So to say that the true ether disappeared, and the Celts would be eradicated, is not quite right. The Celts indeed managed to survive. It was just that the cost was too great. All parts related to the age of gods and true ether were severed. Just like having an amputation below the neck. The surviving Celts no longer had the strength to participate in grand history. They could only survive in the bitter cold corners. In proper human history, they had no significant place of their own. They couldn't even be considered extras, they were just a group of background characters. So, my plan is still correct. With this thought in mind, Artorius returned to Dublin's anchorage at the fastest speed. By this time, the sky was gradually darkening. Artorius was about to enter the dreamland again. Chapter 48, Scat Hatch. Good night, big brother. Mordred said. Mordred always greeted him with good morning, so it was only natural for her to bid him good night as well. With a contented smile, Mordred closed her eyes and soon the sound of her steady breathing filled the room. Artorius, making sure his adorable sister had fallen asleep, prepared to doze off as well. Who will I dream of tonight? Artorius wondered to himself. Will I find the way to the land of shadows? Artorius was filled with anticipation before falling asleep, and perhaps he envied Merlin a little. As an incubus, Merlin possessed much stronger dream-invoking abilities than him. Finding the land of shadows should be much simpler for that guy. If it doesn't work out, I'll ask for his help when I meet that shady guy, Artorius thought, pulling Mordred, who instinctively moved closer to him, into a tight embrace. If it were an ordinary couple who slept like this every night, the woman would develop cervical issues, and the man would suffer from shoulder inflammation. But Artorius and Mordred were exempt from such problems. Their physical condition ensured that they wouldn't encounter any issues even if they slept upside down. However, there's no guarantee I'll reach the land of shadows smoothly. I might end up in some other region within the reverse side. Artorius continued to ponder. In that case, will I be able to meet that pink-haired woman again? It wouldn't be bad if it were her. It would make up for yesterday's mistake. Although Artorius believed that Med would be furious and seething with anger after he left yesterday, it didn't matter. Regardless of how displeased she might be, she could only endure it while gazing upon his exquisitely unparalleled look. The purple granny is also nice, but it's frustrating to see her without being able to have her way. As he was about to fall asleep, or rather, slip into unconsciousness, Artorius sensed that something was amiss. There was someone beside him. With this thought in mind, he immediately reached for Clarent, preparing to strike without hesitation. As a general who had witnessed countless assassinations on the brutal battlefield, Artorius had experienced his fair share of assassination attempts. Killing while in sleep was a basic skill. However, his opponent's speed was astonishingly fast. Almost as soon as Artorius sensed something was wrong and gripped Clarent, a heavy blow landed on his forehead. Fuck! Is it going to end here? Artorius forced himself to endure the dizziness and struggled to open his eyes. At least let little Mo. As he thought this, he readied his sword. But what he saw before him surprised him greatly. It was a stunning woman dressed in tight, purple leather armor with a black mask, her flowing hair a vibrant shade of purple. She was the one who had viciously struck Artorius's head, causing him to be dizzy. Purple overwhelmed with shock, Artorius nearly blurted out his inner thoughts, but before he could finish his words, the woman's eyes flickered, and her gaze toward Artorius became even more dangerous. With two more swift strikes to Artorius's head, she finished him off. And so, Artorius successfully slept away. Dreamland. My head. Ugh, it hurts. Upon waking up again, Artorius found himself in a dream. Really, I should have been more careful. The prince regretted it silently. He knew that after the Age of Gods, those Irish people had vanished into the reverse side of the world, but he had no idea they could jump back and forth between the reverse side and the real world. If he had known, he definitely wouldn't have taken that purple granny words as a slogan and kept mentioning them at every opportunity. At least he wouldn't have been so reckless when he arrived in Ireland. But thinking about all this now won't change anything. Artorius thought to himself, if she didn't strike at me right away and kill me, then there must be something to talk about. This is a dream. She pulled me into this dream because she was captivated by my handsome appearance and charisma. So she was enchanted and wanted to make me hers. Hey. Well, I don't actually mind this kind of development. In fact, I've always been an admirer of yours. As Artorius happily entertained these thoughts, a red light shimmered not far away, followed by a cold gleaming crimson spear, soaring toward Artorius. It was none other than Scat Hatch, the purple lady whom Artorius had been longing to encounter, wielding her weapon known as the Gee-Balg. In the next instant, Artorius swiftly swung his sword, clarent, clashing it with the spear's blade, producing a crisp sound. Then, in another instant, Artorius took a step back, clashing his sword again with another blood-red spear of the same style. At the same time, Artorius caught a glimpse of her. In her eyes, excitement and killing intent sparkled, accompanied by a joyful smile. Wielding her dual spears, she moved like she was dancing, gracefully and skillfully. "Scat hatch!" Artorius Pendragon shouted with delight, swinging his sword fiercely toward his opponent. This time, it wasn't a clash of martial techniques. Although they exchanged only a few moves, Artorius had already realized that his combat skills were no match for his opponent's. Secondly, his fighting style was not suitable for one-on-one combat. Clarent, in his hands, was a two-handed sword, its techniques vast and varied, making it a formidable presence on the battlefield. However, when faced with an opponent who surpassed him in speed, agility, and techniques, it was not enough. Scathika's combat skills exceeded his own, wielding her dual spears with agile and cunning techniques. It perfectly countered Artorius in a one-on-one duel. If he insisted on fighting head-on, the chances of victory were slim. Therefore, Artorius decided to use his sword beam. Frost-colored magical energy gathered on the blade of his sword, and he launched it forcefully toward his opponent. This move was devastating on the battlefield. Its power was equally formidable in personal combat. Compared to all sword beams, whether it be his mother, Mordred, his cousin Gawain, or Lucius, Artorius was no less capable. However, not bad. However, compared to the purple-haired lady on the other side, he still seemed too naive. His opponent simply swung her spear. To Artorius's astonishment, her spear pierced through his beam. It was as if a sharp paper knife cut a piece of paper in half. Scat hatch broke through the beam and closed in on Artorius, getting closer and closer. "Got you." When Scat hatch was less than 1.5 meters away from Artorius, fully within her striking range, Artorius felt a sense of pride within him. A freezing sensation suddenly emanated from his body. Reality Marble Frost of Deathly Silence, activated once again. The chilling cold capable of freezing souls spread along Gee-Balg's spearhead, extending towards her arm. Swiftly, at a speed even Scat hatch couldn't react to, her arm was frozen. "This battle ultimately ends with my victory." This was Artorius's final thought before he was knocked unconscious by the spear on Scathika's left hand. Chapter 49, Testing. "Fuck, it hurts. Headache." Artorius felt like someone repeatedly hitting the back of his head with a spear, both in reality and in dreams several times, so goddamn painful. Artorius, who regained consciousness again, groaned, "Ack. Such an attractive youth, such agony. If it were the usual big sister, she would have surely shown concern and care by now. But the other person didn't. You're not dead, kid." The cold, purple-haired beauty uttered such cold words. Artorius, dizzy and disoriented, fixed his gaze on her icy face. Unlike the battle-hungry woman from the previous battle, this Scat hatch had an aura of tranquility and wisdom. She crouched beside Artorius's head, looking at him with indifferent eyes. Just now, Artorius recalled and confirmed how he had been defeated. When his frost of deathly silence froze her right arm, Scat hatch swiftly turned around, allowing it to pass. In that split second before the frost of deathly silence could spread, she struck Artorius on the back of his head with the butt of the spear in her left hand. As the frost dragon, Artorius had an incredibly robust physical constitution, so he shouldn't have fainted from a single blow. However, he also had to factor in the head injury caused by Scathika's surprise attack in the real world before. The combination of the two made Artorius lose consciousness. It was just a moment. Artorius thought, if just a little longer, the frost of deathly silence would have spread throughout her body, and then the victory would have been mine. That's why he had to get close to her, initiating the reality marble. He was concerned about her speed and reaction. If he couldn't strike from zero distance, she would undoubtedly evade his reality marble's range, use some magecraft, or find other ways to counter him. Artorius's plan had indeed succeeded. As for the subsequent failure, it was the result of the shameless surprise attack from her before the battle. So, let's call it a draw, 50-50. Since she as well, could barely hold her ground against me after all. Artorius deliberately spoke in a tone that Scat hatch could hear and said softly. "Scat hatch. The Queen of the Land of Shadows felt that she hadn't hit this kid hard enough. Although she didn't fully understand Artorius's thought process, by putting herself in his shoes and reconstructing the previous battle scene, Scathatch, possessing the wisdom of Dunscath, could grasp about 70 to 80% of his meanings. And then, she felt like hitting him. I only used spearmanship, kid. After standing up, Scathatch said to Artorius with a casual tone, I didn't use magecraft, nor did I use my authority as the Queen of the Land of Shadows. And yet, I am the one who emerged victorious. Oh, yeah, sure, sure. Artorius also stood up and looked at the purple figure in front of him with a slightly contemptuous gaze. You won, okay? Are you satisfied now, big sister? Scathatch. No, she wanted to hit him even more. This kid's attitude seemed to say you're already such an adult. Why bother arguing with me, a child, about these trivial matters? So competitive and eager to prove yourself. What Queen of the Land of Shadows? What hero? You're just too narrow-minded. So. She took 2 deep breaths, suppressing the desire to beat him up, and then said to him, Why were you searching for me all over Ireland, Britain's son of dragon? Firstly, your address is outdated, Artorius told her. My primary titles now are Governor of the Roman Empire, Conqueror of Germania, Guardian of Gaul, and Savior of Europe. Secondly, I no longer wish to find you. The journey of seeking you, prompted by a momentary whim, has ended because this prince is now satisfied. So now, it is you who has come to find me, your majesty. You're the one who's so competitive. Watching Artorius behave shamelessly like that, talking nonsense with a straight face, Scathatch burst into laughter instead of anger. Is this the kind of tough guy act you put on in front of women you like? She commented, Of course, even if you're like that, I don't dislike it. Hearing Scathatch's words, Artorius showed a flustered expression of how did she know, which made Scathatch burst into a joyful laugh. Don't pretend, kid. Scathatch leaned in close to Artorius's ear and spoke with a magnetic voice, with your craftiness, you wouldn't be flustered just by this. Stop this poor performance of yours. Ha ha ha. Hearing Scathatch's remark, Artorius finally revealed a genuinely happy smile from within. It's not poor at all, your majesty. Scathatch. Artorius turned his face slightly, imitating Scathatch, and whispered in her ear, I've been earnestly contemplating your feelings. That's why I'm acting with great care. Such a boring trick. Really? Is that what you think? Don't you find it amusing? What a twisted taste. Agree to disagree, then. After this conversation, the two of them separated. 2 chairs appeared out of thin air behind them, and Artorius and Scathatch sat down together. Artorius could see a sense of appreciation in the other's eyes. From the moment Scathatch appeared before Artorius, they were testing each other. To be more precise, Scathatch was the one testing Artorius more. Testing his reaction speed, his martial skills, his intelligence, character, and even his shamelessness. It was her instinct as an excellent teacher. Every teacher tests their new students to assess their abilities and tailor their teaching accordingly. Scathatch was no exception. She divided each test subject into 6 grades, EDSPA, and an extraordinary evaluation that didn't fit into any category, X. Of course, in reality, these should be written with runic letters. But using modern English directly makes it easier to understand, right? Scathatch's evaluation of Artorius was quite high. Martial arts, B. Coming from a disciplined background, he is very solid. He has gained a lot of practical experience on the battlefield, but without guidance, his techniques and moves need improvement. Magecraft, B. He patched together his knowledge, self-taught. His foundation in magecraft is weak, but there is a lot of room for improvement. Physique, A+++, whether his speed, strength, endurance, or magical energy, they are all top-notch. Flexibility, reaction speed, and body control need improvement, but with training, they can reach the highest level. Wisdom and temperament, A. Quite intelligent, cunning, and willing to resort to any means necessary. In some aspects, he even exceeds her expectations. In conclusion, this is a child with considerable talent and potential. The potential and talent are so high that it made her excited. It's hard to resist the urge to teach and eagerly anticipate his progress. Teacher Scathatch is very satisfied with this. Chapter 50, Misunderstanding. You came to find me, basically for that kind of thing, right? Sitting upright and enjoying the sight of the attractive youth, Scathatch continued speaking to Artorius with an assured and effortless tone. Considering your sincerity in coming all this way to find me, and your diligent efforts to impress, I'll reluctantly agree. When she mentioned that kind of thing, of course, she wasn't referring to what Med next door was up to. It was about the cliché plot for the Fate series: transmigrators or reincarnators became disciples of Scathatch. Be grateful, kid. You should also be aware of the current state of the world. Technically, I shouldn't be taking on disciples anymore. After finishing these words, Scathatch realized she had made a mistake. Because in front of her, Artorius had a pleased expression. That expression seemed to say, "You fool, you've finally fallen into my hands." This puzzled Scathatch. Apart from her considerable skills and the ability to teach, she didn't have any other advantages. This dragon prince went to great lengths to come here, searching and fooling around with Med and dreams. Wasn't he seeking her guidance to further improve himself? What else could it be? Surely he wasn't genuinely infatuated with her beauty? Thinking this, Scathatch couldn't help but chuckle. If this were 500 years ago, she might have considered it. But now, the queen of the land of shadows had already withered inside. Love and romance, she had passed the age of pondering such things. So, she envied that child, who, even now, maintained youthful vitality and remained like a typical girl Med. In fact, one of the reasons she came to find Artorius today was partly because she wanted to vent her frustration by showing Med who was the boss. Of course, now, Artorius held a higher position in her heart than Med and didn't bother about that pink woman anymore. Could it be him? If it's him, perhaps my wish can be fulfilled. Though she wasn't at the point of being desperate or exhausted, the current Scathatch had a premonition, an expectation, a belief. She needed a disciple who was strong enough, tenacious enough, and ruthless enough to be prepared for the worst. Of course, even if he wasn't ruthless enough, the guise she possessed would ensure he acted mercilessly when facing her. So, she had originally chosen that target. The one named Cu Culane, the Hound of Culin, as her insurance. But that guy died. And he died so miserably. It was truly laughable. With that in mind, her satisfaction with Artorius grew even higher. This kid was clearly an old fox. He was ruthless enough and shameless enough. Probably, if necessary, he would mercilessly attack her without hesitation. With his sword, his spear, he would ruthlessly pierce through her body. However, it was not at all like that. Artorius mercilessly rejected her, saying, "I searched for you, to discuss a matter of great importance that affects the whole world." Facing Scathatch, who seemed somewhat bewildered, he continued without hesitation. "If it were back when I was just starting out, I would have accepted you as my teacher. But now, my position is different. Ultimately, I am a leader, a prince. In the future, I am destined to play the role of an emperor. If the emperor were to personally engage in combat, wouldn't the empire be deemed a failure? What would be the purpose of having so many subordinates? Therefore, all I need is a certain level of combat ability to protect myself and leave the rest to my subordinates. Oh, of course, if you have an obsession with teaching and can't bear not being someone's teacher, that's not a problem either. I can introduce you to my sister. She's the one." "Hold on a moment." When Artorius reached this point, Scathatch interrupted him. "In other words, you're not here to seek my instruction in martial arts or magecraft and such?" "Nope, not at all." "Then, I already said, I need your help not as a teacher, but for research in magecraft. In this age where gods are hiding, you are the one I can find with the most extensive and profound knowledge of magecraft." "No. That's not it." Before Artorius could reveal his grand plan and his ambition to usurp the fate of Franks, and before he could try to persuade her to assist him with a series of reasons, Scathatch interrupted his torrent of words. She stood up and approached Artorius. This proximity was too dangerous for a teenage boy like him. So Artorius couldn't continue saying what he wanted to say. He could only fix his gaze on her assertive outstretched hand, feeling embarrassed as he thumped back into his seat. With a strong sense of shame, Scathatch looked intently at Artorius, like a predator stalking its prey. Was she mistaken? In other words, did she misunderstand everything just now? Did she make a fool of herself in front of this boy? Was she too overconfident? Look at the expression in his eyes, they were filled with contempt as he looked at her. Though he didn't say it out loud, Scathatch was certain he was completely denying her teaching ability. It was as if he was saying, "A granny like you wants to be my teacher? I think you're delusional. You, a granny, can you compare to Chiron? Look at his numerous disciples, the finest of them being Greece's top heroes. And yet, your best disciple is a dog, for God's sake. You may seem wise and intelligent on the surface, but you're failing so miserably. You're probably a member of the Tosaka family as well." With this thought, Scathatch suppressed the desire to thrust her spear through Artorius and made a decision. Since that was the case, there was only one path left to take. "Speak." Scathatch looked at Artorius seriously, her red spear trembling in her right hand. "You came here to seek me out, desiring my unrivaled glorious martial arts and the world's greatest mage craft. You want me to teach you how to become stronger, right?" In an instant, 180 thoughts raced through Artorius's mind. From "this woman has gone insane" to "maybe she wants to imprison and exploit me." Before he could select the most reasonable answer from these 180 options, a thunderous sound reverberated as Geebalg gouged out a trench tens of meters deep and hundreds of meters long, burying Artorius's words in the ground. After swallowing a gulp of saliva, he calmly repeated the words Scathatch had just said. I came here to seek you out, desiring your unrivaled glorious martial arts and the world's greatest mage craft, and to ask you to teach me how to become stronger." After saying these words, as Artorius watched Scathatch's expression turn pleased and relaxed, he added the second half of his sentence. "By the way, I also want to discuss a matter related to the fate of the world." Feeling refreshed, Scathatch neither confirmed nor denied it.